I will call the meeting to order. And before we start, without objection, I would like to change the order of the agenda items to move the status update on transportation to right after the fourth quarter financial review. So before we have the whole VSBA VI discussion of both proxy voting and the resolutions, which can take some time, and we know we have some community members who are particularly interested in the transportation agenda item. So with that, the first item on the agenda is comments from the public on items that are not on our agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Yes.
People usually stand.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So my name is Jess. I am a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade Spanish teacher at Essex Middle School. Some of you know me from other roles that I hold in the district, but I'm here as just a teacher, not just a teacher, as a teacher. As a teacher. About my current situation this year. So I have a handout that I'm going to give you after that kind of gives more detail about it. But the main thing, and I lost my background, I have 9 years in this district, 10 years teaching total. I envision myself retiring from Essex. But if this current situation stays the way it is, I can't see myself lasting. So usually I have anywhere from like 120 to 135 students assigned to me at any given time. This year that has increased by 76%. I have 230 students assigned to me right now, which that in of itself is a little bit suffocating for me to get to know these kids as well as I, as a middle school teacher, think it's important to build relationships and have those close connections so that I can help the students and support them in the way that they most need it at the time that they're most, becoming the most independent and kind of getting them off to a good start. But on top of that, I have less prep time than I've ever had due to an assigned duty. All of the current situation I have talked to my administrator about. All of it is 100% within the contract. So I'm not here to talk about the current contract. I'm here to hope that you guys can give a little bit of an eye into what happens when contracts are written the way that they are. So this one is you guys discuss recommendations for per class caps. All of my classes are between 17 and 24 students, but I have 12 of them. That puts the numbers up where they are. Also, and the other point of interest to you guys is the program changes that cause an inequity in foreign language between the two middle schools in the district. So the two, basically now I shouldn't say two, there are three, but there's been always inequity with the Westford program. Like they don't have Spanish, what I teach, right? Yes. Yeah. But right now the two ADL and EMS, the two main feeder schools, will have the next group of 8th graders graduating will have a different level of Spanish going into the high school. So that affects the program in a major way that we haven't really figured out what to even do with it yet. So as you guys consider programmatic changes that were proposed and have made a big difference in my experience, think about also how that has a bigger effect on the whole program. Do you guys have any questions before I give this to you? And I know you need to get onto a busy agenda.
So I need to ask you, we have a communication policy and a complaint policy, which this feels like, and it asks that you first go to the administration of your school. Okay, thanks. Okay, and then that you go to the superintendent. Have you done that?
I don't think I've mentioned it to you in passing. It was
Yeah.
never
We never.
an official agenda item. Okay, so I've skipped a step and I apologize for that.
Okay.
So
So,
I really don't think that there's going to be anything done this year. I really don't. And I'm not trying to say that. I understand that.
so I hear you asking for us to understand your situation as we talk about the contract for next year.
Yes.
Okay. Any clarifying questions?
I do have one. Sure.
Yes.
So you said, I mean, obviously the 17 to 24 is within the recommended, class size range. The difference is the 12 classes. What do you usually have, if you don't mind me asking?
8.
So it's been a pretty dramatic. Okay.
Okay. All right, so, Kim,
It's just, you mentioned the disparity between the Spanish programming at EMS and at ADL, and I guess I just don't know what that is. Is that-
So the ADL program has stayed the way it always, there's been no change. And they had foreign language every day for 7th and 8th grade. That used to be how it was at EMS, we're now every other day.
Okay. Thank you.
okay.
This is just for takeaways, you don't have to read it now, it's just in case you
Thanks,
want more of my thoughts.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening, I know that
Of course.
it's not the negotiation season.
Thanks, Jess. Well, Jess, you know better.
Is it never not?
Be the negotiations.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on now to.
Another one?
Oh, we have somebody else. I'm sorry, Todd.
Just wanted to thank you for rearranging the agenda for your business section, and now we'll be back to that and go put my kids to bed, and I'll be back for that. So thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of the minutes from September 18th and approval of warnings. Does anything need to be pulled from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we approve the consent agenda consisting of the board meeting minutes from September 18th and approval of warrants.
So moved.
Thanks, Liz. Because this is a consent agenda, there's no discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thanks. All right, so tonight we have a presentation from, on the continuous improvement plan. We have, I think, all of our principals here. It's wonderful to have you. Welcome. And I'll turn it over to
Sure.
Beth to do the introduction.
All right. So yes, tonight is about how each school and each grade level team are meeting the goals within our district continuous improvement plan. So the point is also to show you the alignment within the schools and how we are reaching our goals. If you flip to the next one, I can set it out. So all of them lead to our, sorry, Brian. She has the power. So they all lead towards our vision, growing hearts and minds for a better today and tomorrow, every day, every way, everyone, and our theory of action that really focuses in on all students and first instruction, which is that main instruction as students receive. And a continuous growth for all of us, including our adults and our students in our system. That's really what our theory of action is about. The next page, or the next slide, Wendy. So you'll notice as they go through, I did put this slide in here just to remind you that our goals for our continuous improvement plan fall under the 5 categories of engagement, or we call them the framework, of engagement, of equity, which you will read more about when you read Building Equity, which we will. So this will even become clearer to you as we do our book study together. So it's all about engaging, inspiring learners, the instructional excellence, opportunities to learn, social and emotional engagement, and physical integration. So each of our goals, you'll see how they go. And they'll present in grade level teams and then have a bit about each of their schools too. Okay. You're on. Catherine is at a PTO meeting tonight and she is not with us. Who's part of the K-5 team? Dan.
My name is Peter Farrell, I'm the principal of Essex Elementary School. I'm joined by my colleagues from the other pre-K-5 schools. We were drawing straws earlier. I drew the short straw, so I'm setting the context for you. The pre-K through 5th grade principals have been meeting regularly. We've also been meeting with our 6, 7, and 8 principals more regularly recently to align our individual school priorities with the continuous improvement plan, but not only with the continuous improvement plan, but also with each other's plans, so that none of us is sort of striking out into some area where nobody else feels we should be heading. We're using the continuous improvement plan and the 5 pillars of that plan to develop our own individual school priorities, but tying them together. So what we're going to show you here is this is by no means an exhaustive list of what is happening in our schools. These are sort of some of the highlights within each of our buildings. But we also, each of us wants to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening in our buildings right now that reflect the continuous improvement plan and some of the pillars within that plan. So I'm going to start, since I'm already talking, about one of the things that we've done at Essex Elementary School is we have really rededicated our commitment to responsive classroom. We have been a responsive classroom school, sort of, but this year we are really taking steps to really cement ourselves that way. I have gone to a week-long responsive classroom course myself. Wendy and I are going out to Minneapolis to the responsive classroom leadership in November to bring back ideas from that. Within our building, using the additional time that we now have, we now have a half hour a day that we didn't have before. We have devoted that time to morning meeting in every single classroom, every single day, at the same time. So from 8 o'clock to 8:20 in every classroom at Essex Elementary School, we are having morning meeting. And we have been trained in running morning meetings by Stacy Mead, a teacher who is a responsive classroom trainer at Founders. In addition to having those morning meetings, we have also, nothing else goes on in the building from 8 to 8:20. Our custodian is in morning meetings. One of our office staff is in morning meetings. Our special educators are in morning meetings. I'm in morning meetings. Only our nurse, sort of those essential on-call people are not in morning meeting. And it's not, they're not just dropping into morning meetings. We have a schedule so that any one of our special educators, for instance, will spend a week in Sonia Clark's kindergarten every day for morning meeting, getting to know those kids get to know her. She will then the following week go to a 1st grade classroom. She could go to Julia Akinfour's class, be there for a week, getting to know those kids don't, and then she would move on to a 2nd grade, and then she goes back to another kindergarten class. So we have a whole schedule that plays out. I am not on the schedule because I go from one to another. I stop in, I have my own schedule. I go to kindergarten first, second kindergarten first, second kindergarten first, second. That way I get to see everybody's. gives me a great idea of what sort of professional development we need strictly around morning meeting. And sort of anecdotally, I have walked into the teacher's lounge and heard our PE teacher talking with one of our instructional assistants about, have you been in so-and-so's classroom yet? What an awesome morning meeting. The kids are so excited. So it's just creating this great energy in the building, not only among the staff, but I also see kids saying hello to people in the halls that they might not have known before. If you're in a kindergarten classroom, you don't often see a special educator who's assigned to second grade, but now she's in your classroom and you get to know that person, and that's just one more person in the building. So that's one example of what we're doing at EDS. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Cobb. I'm the principal of Founders, and I can pretty much ditto everything Peter said about his work with Responsive Classroom at EES at FMS. So we are doing very similar things around Responsive Classroom, which is related to Goal 4, social emotional engagement of our students. In addition to that, we're also doing, and I know Peter's doing this too, school-wide morning meetings once a month. And we're getting that training from Stacy Mead, one of our teachers at Founders. I'm going to go to goal. You think about goal 2 around instructional excellence. I'm going to talk a little bit about Bridges, our math program. EES and FMS are in year 1 implementation of the Bridges program. Really excited about that. But also we were a little anxious about it as well. That has been a big focus area for us as a staff this year. We just actually had a PLC meeting, 90-minute PLC meeting, digging into units and looking at student data. We are utilizing our coaches as well as our interventionists and outside math consultants from the Math Learning Center to support teachers. Providing lots of time during that PLC time after school to plan units together, talk about student learning, talk about their assessments, and teachers are feeling really good. I've been in and out of classrooms all year, and what's really exciting for me is to go into a whole grade level of 7 third grade teachers and really see the same things going on in every classroom around number corner and their instruction. That really gets at the heart of equity around math instruction, and that's been a concern of mine for a long time, is that not that kids were getting the wrong instruction or poor instruction, but there was a lot of discrepancies around what kids were getting in terms of content. And I'm feeling, hearing some good things from teachers. They're excited about it, and we're doing a lot of work together across our buildings, utilizing coaches and doing professional learning around it. So we're pretty excited about year 1 so far. That's it for me. Suzanne.
I'll move on to Summit Street School and into the pre-K through 3rd grade world. It's exciting to see, as EWSD is evolving, all of the linkages that we've built over the short time that we've all been together to carry through, where we are also a focus on morning meeting, responsive classroom, and have school-wide morning meeting happening in all of our classrooms first thing in the morning, similar time frame. And when you talk about greeting, sharing, and activity, a greeting is a really essential part to a student's day. And in the greeting portion of it, it could be a different activity greeting that students do every day, where all students are greeting all students and welcoming each other to their school day and making those connections. We also try, as our goal every single day, is that every student is greeted by name 5 times in the first 15 minutes by an adult at our school. And I think that on most days, most of our students, we do a really great job at that. And I think that that's a really important part of our day, where our students have all left us for the night. They're all coming in. lots of things happen in the morning, on your way to school, on the playground in the morning, and having that time where every student has eyes on by an adult 5 times in the morning, greeted by name, so students know that we are excited you are here, we are excited that you're here to learn, and also gives us an opportunity to get our eyes on students and make sure, does anybody need anything? So you need anything to be ready to learn for your day, that we are there and ready to make sure that we provide it so students have that equitable access to learning. We are year 5 as a PBIS school, as a positive behavior interventions and support school, and with that is still that very intentional, supportive, responsive classroom in there. So really concentrating on that universal tier 1 of we are a be safe, be kind, be responsible school, and really acknowledging that positive piece of it over and over and over again all day. And we just analyzed our September data for PBIS of all of our office referrals, and interestingly enough, at the beginning of the year, when you first come into the year, we're teaching you how we acknowledge positive behavior. We use something called sunbands. And so at the very beginning of the year, we first do it just in the classrooms. Then we move it to classrooms and hallways, and then we move it to classrooms, hallways, cafeteria, and so forth throughout the building. And our behavior data was highest in our first week of school, which is generally sort of a honeymoon period of time, which has really showed the effect of rolling out PBIS, and we intentionally roll it out every year, even though we're in year 5. We were really lucky to be joined by Westford and Fleming also as PBIS schools, which helps us with our energy and exchange of ideas with that. Another big focus this year, of course, is professional learning communities. It has been dynamic to have our district time together to watch, whereas Wendy's talking about year 1 as Bridges, we're year 4 of Bridges. They are year many of PLCs, and we are year 1 of PLCs. And you put all of the teachers, and I'm in the kindergarten, PLC together in the room, and you see that support that you're able to interweave with each other. As dynamic's the word I use because it's dynamic. It gives me a lot of energy to work with the teacher leaders both at Summit and teacher leaders that we have throughout the district. And as I said, I have the kindergarten teacher leaders to just be inspired by. So the 3 big ideas of PLCs that we are working on, so the sort of the 3 main ideas are that collaborative teaming approach, that building the culture of collaboration, and that focus on student learning throughout. And just to speak a little bit about Hiawatha, same goals for instructional excellence on PLCs. In addition, they have some goals this year that they're working on around diversity and mindfulness as well, and a big literacy focus. And I think we'll see literacy focus come out as well for many of our PLCs. So Ryan,
Thank you, Dan Ryan, proud to be principal of Fleming School. I'm noticing that some of my talking points are already on the screen, so I have a visual aid.
What screen do you want?
Huh?
Which
This
one do you want?
3-4.
This one? Okay.
As Suzanne mentioned, we are a PBIS school. However, we're entering our 2nd year as a PBIS school, so we're hoping to advance to level 2 of PBIS. And we're working very hard on that. We did get an acknowledgement for getting a merit achievement ribbon from PBIS in the state for meeting all of our targets for the first year of PBIS in our school. So we really feel proud that we're really rolling out PBIS in an effective way, and it's making a difference in our building in terms of building positive culture in our school for students and for staff. And we're also investing in a staff read and learn book study for the book Building Equity. I passed out the books today. We're going to have a plan to roll that out and read different chapters and discuss different chapters, and then we decided that we would come together in a big way over the book on Martin Luther King Day, and we're all there for school for that day and focus on equity that day. Under Goal 4, provide social, emotional learning, professional learning opportunities for all staff. We really feel that's an area that goes hand in hand with PBIS, but it's recognizing just as our students need intervention and support in literacy and math, they also need intervention and support for learning social and emotional skills and applying what they've learned. As Responsive Classroom teaches us that we cannot just assume that kids come to school with these social skills intact, and it's our responsibility to make sure they learn them. And that benefits everyone in our schools if they do learn them. And the last one I would connect with and share with you is what Suzanne mentioned from Hiawatha, from Catherine's focus. Catherine sent us some great slides that she did today with her faculty and staff on diversity. And I just think her work over there in that area is terrific. But I had already had, as part of our school CIP, to develop classroom libraries that reflect the diversity of our students. So I've told all of my classroom teachers that I want to back their development of their libraries to be more diverse. Not only to have the level books that all the kids in that class can access and read, but also have it be reflective of diversity. So I've given them some information about what I mean by diversity of literature. And our new librarian is also investing in that focus in terms of books that she's purchasing for the library to make sure every student sees their face in every book that they choose. So that's a focus for Fleming.
That's it for elementary school, right? Here we go, middle school.
Now we have middle school.
Who do I give the clicker?
I would just push it once and then hand it to Rob.
Probably not, Kevin.
Oh, one more. One more. There we are. We're a one-slide show. It's really much easier for us. So, Kevin Briggs, principal at Essex Middle School, and I'll look at your shoes.
Jennifer Wood, LBT Lawton School.
Westford, pre-K 8, Marcy Lewis.
And I am so honored to be a part of this community. I walked in with Beth on the way in, and she asked me how I was doing. I said, great. How couldn't you feel great working in this district? It is an amazing district with an amazing leadership team, and I just get inspired just sitting even here listening to what we're doing across. So, and then when I see Laura sitting over there, it's even better. Because of course, she was an EMS. So anyways, the middle school.
We're not competitive at all.
I am a little competitive. But anyways, the middle schools, for the past, I don't know, a handful of years, back when Lori Singer was here, we actually started talking about getting our staffs together. So it was Marcy, Lori, and myself at that time. Jen was still up in Fairfield doing her thing. And we were starting to get our staffs together. We were starting to have those conversations. This merge has been beautiful in that it has given us the voice, it's given us the approval to say, okay, let's do it. We brought Jen on board, and it has been awesome to have her a part of this as well. Our staff seem excited when they're together. The district PLC, which will be next Tuesday, is focusing, at least for us, and I'll talk about I'm the facilitator, if you would, for the language arts, and we're looking at growing professionally in terms of writing and becoming better teachers of writing together as a whole system, and being able to bring student work in and have those conversations. In math, you guys are meeting tomorrow to discuss what that's going to look like. And in science, they're unpacking the word of the educational year in the last 3 years, to unpack, but they're going to unpack the next gen standards and really dive into what that looks like. And while doing it together, it's going to, in some ways, force, and not in a negative way, but to force them all to understand them together the same, which would be great. So last week or the week before, Eric Mortensen was here, and you all were bulbed, right? I hear the kids now are saying, they're not saying they have to work on their PLPs, they have to work on their bulbs. So I think that might be a good thing. So they were all working on their bulbs as we sit here today. My staff was talking about what they're doing with their students and to make sure that they're going to roll out in about 2 weeks at parent conferences. That's what we talked about. So all middle school kids will be doing what is called an All About Me page, and I think the high school as well, and sharing that with their parents here in a couple of weeks. So that's exciting. I'll talk about the social emotional part. Is that all right with you? All right, so I'll talk about social emotional. I'm going to jump off from what Peter and Wendy talked about, and actually everybody talked about. They have responsive classroom for those little guys. For us taller guys, we have what is called developmental design. And this past spring for 2 days, and this past fall for 2 days, my entire staff at Essex Middle School, that's everyone from my nurse to my IAs to my classroom teachers, UA teachers, everybody was involved in a training. Heather was there as well. And it was amazing to watch. And what it did was it brought us all together in a way to have similar philosophies, similar expectations, similar way of working with kids, similar understanding of kids, to work with them in the morning meetings, which is very similar to what's happening over here. So just like in Peter's, all of my UA teachers, all my staff go to UAs, or they go to morning meetings every single day. So there's at least 2 adults in there, and they're having this nice relationship with those kids. It has transformed the way we work within the halls and talk to kids. We had a great staff meeting today where I was just throwing out, so what do you do if a kid, blah, 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 I won't say it here because we're on TV. Well, what do you do with a middle school kid who does that, right, on a Friday afternoon as they're walking out to the bus? How do you deal with that in a developmental design sort of fashion? And the conversation was just amazing. It went, what might have been in years past, a scolding. How dare you ever do that to me? You embarrass me, da 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 da. The teacher taking it personally, to recognizing that a kid is not doing that to personally attack you, that there's a story, and you need to listen and stop and hear that story. So that's been a beautiful thing that's happened at the Essex Middle School.
So I have the pleasure of working with the K-5 principals and the 6-8 principals. I would say that the talking points for Westford around personalized learning and instructional excellence. So we are looking at increased student choice and increased student voice, and that is within context of core classrooms in terms of choice, and it is also in context of additional exploratories and additional clubs at the middle level. So that's kind of a new focus for us. To piggyback on the responsive classroom work that we do and the PBIS work that we do around social and emotional development. We're also looking at more voice for their middle school kids in terms of clubs and in terms of committees so that they have some voice in how school operates. As you can imagine, in a K-8 school, students have been with us sometimes 2 years in preschool. And by the time they're in 8th grade, they own their school and they want a bit more voice in how that looks, and they don't want to be treated like elementary school students. And so we're really trying to differentiate in that way. I've partnered with Kevin and Jen in a lot of those areas, and I think it's going well. I would say some of the partnerships include A World of Difference, and Jen will talk a little bit more about that. It does include instructional excellence in terms of our PLP work, PLC work. Let's see how many acronyms I can use. And also, really the bare bones of it is that we are looking for instructional excellence by modeling a growth mindset for kids and adults. So it's this idea of continuous improvement. And the focus, and you saw Wendy speak a little bit about Hattie's work and how do we prioritize what we do. Teacher efficacy is a conversation that we're having as a leadership team, and it's a conversation that we're having with their teachers. And the bottom line for that is if we're using PLCs, professional learning communities, to collaborate, and we want to put people in a room together because we can rely on each other and extend kind of their knowledge across buildings. Super helpful for Westford because we're a small staff, so I benefit the most probably from this. We want them to be in a room together with a level of collective efficacy so that they believe that what is within their control they can execute for student learning. So the bottom line is what we know from Hattie's research is that collective teacher efficacy is the #1 predictor of are we going to be successful, more so than socioeconomic class, more so than factors that you might perceive to be a challenge for kids. And so I love the idea that what we're doing for instructional excellence in our district is that we're working together, starting with the belief that what we do matters and that is within our control. It feels good to be part of a team that is focused on that.
just echo that. Just really am feel so fortunate to be a part of this group and this group. Learn so much from my colleagues every time we get together, and I think modeling that collaborative learning, collaborative teaming is just creates that domino effect, that ripple effect throughout the system. As Marcy and Kevin both mentioned, we're continuing to work on instructional excellence through our collaborative work in PLCs with teachers this year. At ADL, we've been meeting in teams, in team meetings for several years, as have our other schools. And this year, we're just really intentionally focused on building upon those meeting structures we've already had in place and really working to support our PLC leaders in their facilitation of those meetings to really focus on the 4 questions of professional learning communities, those 3 essential ideas that Suzanne referenced earlier, to really benefit from that collaborative teaming to improve student outcomes. One additional piece that ADL has implemented this year with our meeting schedule is a weekly meeting with our core teaching teams and our learning specialists. So our reading specialists, our math specialists, and our special educators have every Friday meet with their core teaching teams as part of our MTSS team meeting structure to really look at student evidence, review instructional strategies, and plan interventions and enrichment to support student learning. So that's a new part of the work that we're doing this year to continue that instructional excellence and work for students. Also, along with professional development, our math team at ADL this year is going to be piloting and engaging in professional development around math problem solving. We'll be piloting a resource called Exemplars, which is a collection of performance tasks, which is focused on problem solving, communication skills, really building students' critical thinking skills and the mathematical practices. Our teachers are really excited to get started with that work and to see the benefit that it brings to our students. Marcy mentioned earlier the AWOD, the A World of Difference work, which we've just been thrilled to bring into ADL and Westford. This will be our 2nd year. EMS has been several years. Westford and ADL partnered last year for the first year and trained several students to be peer facilitators of the World of Difference program. This year, we trained 17, I think, new students to be facilitators just last month. This program really focuses to plan activities that help support our anti-bias education, celebrating differences, embracing inclusivity in our schools. Our students from our AWOD group at ADL meet weekly during our wellness block, which is a 40-minute wellness block we have every week for all students. So students are dedicating their time for that wellness block for the World of Difference programming. They also went into 6th grade classrooms last year to implement the lessons and facilitate dialogue and those discussions around those topics. And they also actually assembled and organized our back to school assembly this year, and that message was really focused on kindness and acceptance, and are working this month to continue activities for our school in recognition of National Bullying Prevention Month, which is in October. So that is good work that we are continuing and learning along with our colleagues. We also continue to focus on implementing restorative practices at ADL, which I know is also a district-wide focus, and using circles to build community, to do community building and resolve conflicts. Several staff members at ADL have attended outside training and are basically resources for other teachers to facilitate circles when needed, and we're working to have more staff trained. And then just a few celebrations we'd like to end with for our group. One thing is that our ADL Special Education Department this year is organizing a unified sports team at ADL this year. We just found out a couple of days ago that we received a $1,000 grant from the Special Olympics of Vermont, and we will be planning some basketball games with EMS this year. And participating in a unified tournament at Capstan University in May. We're really excited. We're really excited. They'll be participating in our annual basketball tournament at ADL, which you're all familiar with, of course. And then finally, I'm just really excited to mention that we at ADL have been really hush-hush top secret about this news, which was just unveiled on Friday. Our art teacher, Tina Logan, was recognized as Vermont's Art Teacher of the Year on Friday for 2019. Anyone Anyone who knows Tina just knows what a fantastic art teacher she is, and just really what a phenomenal human being she is. Every student and person that has the opportunity to interact with Tina and learn from Tina just walks away just a better person. So we're really pleased for her. And also, Kurt Sherman from Westford School was recognized as the Science Teacher of the Year from the Vermont Association of Science Educators. And I've had the opportunity to meet Kurt this year through my work with the district science PLCs for middle school, because I'm the administrator assigned to that group, so it's been great getting to know him. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good evening, Robert Ribben, principal of the high school, and I just want to share a couple of our initiatives and bodies of work moving forward as it relates to the continuous improvement plan. And for the high school, we're thinking of personalization, pathways, proficiencies as we embark upon our work. So if you remember from the third slide or so that Beth showed, the various pillars, that's in relationship to the goals that we have listed on these series of slides. So I think the first one we could just start with and just say that if there are many benefits of the merger, and in my mind this is one of the huge benefits of the merger, and that is that we have a platform in place for all students from grade 6 through 12 that will give continuity for students as they have the opportunity to provide evidence and catalog all their activities, skills, growth, and development over time, so that when they get to the point where they're looking for life after Essex High School, they'll be able to take their phone out and show whoever is interested what they have accomplished over time. And that really meets the needs of the student learners. During freshman orientation day, I have 4 freshmen this year. In terms of my advisory, I was hit hard by graduation last year with seniors, and they just really got after it. And I was just impressed with how they, by day 1, they had already created their About Me page. We have taken time getting the rest of the classes involved, because each class has a particular theme. Each grade has a theme in terms of their body of work with the personal learning plans, but that is, I think, really positive. Previously, we would get a lot of students from different communities coming into the high school with different formats, which was understandable, and now it should be smooth and continuous. Going along with that, we worked with teachers, of course. We had a task team that met all last year to choose the platform bulb, and so teachers are also creating their own accounts and pages. And basically, all students have been introduced in terms of creating their account and starting to work on their About Me page. And we're looking to have that completed by the 15th for all students. We will do a check-in next Monday to make sure that all students have not had any technology issues. In terms of informing all students of all pathways available, that certainly is done a multitude of ways, including the program of studies as one option. And I guess in terms of various pathways, as Mr. Donahue will attest to today, the Global Leadership Program, we had the Irish ambassador take time out of his busy day before he's heading to DC tonight and UNC Chapel Hill tomorrow to meet with our students in that far corner from the Global Leadership Program. And I thought his hour was well spent, and we had some very focused students asking some excellent questions. So the pathways, once again, we don't want to have what we do a kept secret by any means. And in terms of our pathways, besides the Global Leadership Program, we have our STEM Academy and our Academy for Visual and Performing Arts. And this year our enrollment in STEM is 127 students and growing and climbing, which I'm very proud and pleased of. Our Global Leadership Program has 73 students, and our Academy for Visual and Performing Arts has 71 students. And so those continue to thrive and develop their own niche in the school. In terms of other ways to get information out, we've already hosted class meetings, and we'll be hosting more class meetings during advisory time for students to have access to information. besides PLPs. And of course, of the pathways, our friends at the Tech Center, who will be speaking after I do, they have many excellent opportunities for students to consider as well at Essex High School. This is the four-year scope and sequence. You've seen this before, but I thought it would just be helpful to see it again in terms of each grade and the theme. The grade 10 core values, we had Peter Hawks and John Painter come in a few weeks ago on the Tuesday from 2 to 4, working with our faculty in regards to the Fly and Ryan curriculum, where students will be able to develop their core values and articulate them in terms of BULB. And we have a timeline that the task team continues to meet once a month in terms of the scope and sequence and how that's going to be rolled out. And you can see each grade has various activities so that they can get to their more fully developed BULB portfolio this year. And there may be some tweaks along the way, but this is good work and more to come. In terms of goals 2 and 4, instructional excellence, social emotional engagement. Trauma-informed schools, that's been kind of a catchy phrase, if you will, over the last few years, and that certainly is an area that we want to do more professional learning on with our teachers and our staff. But a lot of the issues that you see that are prevalent, we shouldn't treat separately. And by that I mean we have an increase in anxiety, we have an increase in depression, we have an increase with students who experience trauma, and there's also some very good recent research in regards to sleep deprivation and start times. I highly recommend neuroscientist Matt Campbell's book, Why We Sleep, which talks a great deal about learning for school-age students. Very helpful as we move forward. But the point I'm trying to make is all 4 of these items are not necessarily separate buckets, and they are interrelated. I just read an article recently today in terms of risky childhood behavior as it relates to their sleep or lack thereof over time. So what we're looking to get moving forward in this particular area is get our staff informed in terms of these areas, be more familiar in how they can set the table in terms of their classrooms and their presentations and instructions to meet the needs of all students. And I guess the best way to say it is, from what I've read and what I've heard, is if you prepare for a trauma-informed student or students that experience trauma, that will be perfect for all your students. So it's not like you have to have a cafeteria-style approach in terms of how you're going to interact with your students, both formally and informally. The Tuesday calendar has been rich with activities. With our staff, as I mentioned, the Fly and Ryan piece, we'll be working on assessments next week. We've had proficiency work the first week, and we're looking at developing more norms as we move towards true PLCs working with data. And I would also like to plug and thank the board for the Alpine investment in terms of our data system moving forward. I think that's going to have significant benefit for our students based on the information we can share as students move throughout the system. Which is the first item there in terms of data-driven Alpine. We just had our teacher leaders experience some training a week ago Wednesday, and they were very excited and desire more, which is a good sign. The freshman experience, you see number 3, we are starting, Kevin, this is breaking news for you. Right. We are gonna have our freshman experience task team meet, and Kevin has indicated an interest as we want middle school participation as to what that could look like, not what it just looks like or what it has looked like moving forward, based on research and best practices, keeping in mind the community's wishes. And we also will be more than happy to get student input as well as we embark upon this. This is for FY, probably the fall of 2020. We're not looking to start of next school year, because it's going to take some time. Use of class meetings and assemblies, we've been able to do that in terms of some social emotional components, in terms of not losing instructional time during the school day and using the half hour of time that we've created for this approach for informing our students. The physical integration piece, you may say examine alternative pathways. I just want to point out that we also need to look from within and make sure we don't have any structures, practices that create barriers for our students. So that's what this area is in reference to. We want to make sure that we don't have any unnecessary prerequisites. We want to make sure that students have the opportunity to test themselves and take risks moving forward and not have any adult imposed restrictions. In terms of what's not on slides, I think moving forward, what we need to focus in on in the true spirit of personalization is looking at ways where students can have the opportunity to create more independent study opportunities and perhaps meet proficiencies in ways in addition to the classroom experience. The other piece to that, I would say, in terms of learning being more the constant time to variable, summertime. We have a lot of students, I think, that could benefit by engaging in internships and other outside of school learning opportunities between graduation day and the first day of school in August. And we need to look at the mechanisms and what we can do to increase that. And when students have the opportunity to have more input, i.e. independent studies, or finding their own way to meet a course proficiency that is identified, the more they will take the proverbial bull by the horns and be more invested. Areas of celebration, I was very pleased and proud, and Martha, thank you for being there yesterday, to congratulate Nancy Smith at the UVM Outstanding Teacher Award Day yesterday at the Davis Center, and also, in addition, I thought our own Linda Cloutier-Namdar did an amazing job giving the keynote address for all the outstanding teachers at UVM yesterday as she's stepping down, if you will, from her State Teacher of the Year award. So thanks for being there, I appreciate that. I would now invite Mr. Travers.
And my backup.
Plan B?
Yeah.
Gary? Okay. Thank you. Come on.
Very mindful of your agenda, and I know that we've gone a little over time, so I will try to move quickly through our presentation. My name is Bob Travers. I'm the director for the Center for Technology Essex. Sitting down is Rich Wright, who is new to Center for Technology Essex. We stole him from Mount Mansfield Union High School. He was the assistant principal there. He is now the assistant director in charge of adult education at Center for Technology Essex, doing a wonderful job integrating. He provides great perspective for us, as MMU is one of our service region schools. Carrie Dickinson is the other assistant director at the center. Thinking about the 5 areas of goals and how they relate to Center for Technology Essex, I took a more visual approach, but then I'll go through some of the 3 major projects we're working on. Our 3 major projects are professional learning communities, literacy, and proficiency-based curriculum instruction and assessment. You can see that I believe that, I think I could have put a star in every box. You can bend the language or the thinking as far as you want to make sure that we're taking care of all of the goals that are laid out in the continuous improvement plan. What is missing on that list is the physical integration. I want to point out that I made a personal challenge to my staff who are working as the PLC leaders that we will rely on our teachers to force up through the PLC process what they believe the key changes to our organization, our practices, our schedules, the way we do business. That is, as I understand it, the real benefit of involving your teacher leaders and your staff in PLCs. So we're not ready to fill that column in yet. I also want to point out that as a unique school within our district, we very much benefit from being part of the district while at the same time having to serve the students of 9 sending high schools. Essex High School only being one of them, sometimes 11 high schools in a single year. So the complexities of physical integration at a tech center look a lot different.
There's a lot of exponents.
There are a lot of exponents. So when you talk about aligning schedules between middle schools within this district, how about just knowing when all of our schools are doing PSAT and SAT tests and how that affects our schedule? So I'm going to ask Carrie to talk a little bit about personal learning communities.
Sure. We have a really eager group of teacher leaders this year, and although we don't necessarily have the same kind of options in terms of our horizontal and vertical integration across the district, we're not missing this opportunity to learn and speak the same language as our colleagues across EWSD. And certainly looking forward through that lens of collaboration beyond just CTE in the future. But this year we're really focusing our efforts on training and going slowly to go fast. So we've been training our teacher leaders through the end of the summer and into the fall, and are really working as a full CTE community to really understand the work of D4 and what direction we're going as an EWSD community. So the way that we chose to organize our PLCs is a little bit different than our colleagues across the district, but it makes sense for us. And those teachers have been meeting in groups that make sense based on our organization. And we've been busily working on building our context. So the connection between that and another one of our focus areas is that idea of curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And through the process of doing the PLC work this year, it's really deepening the buy-in that our teachers have into this ongoing curriculum project, where we've really been working to make sure that we document all of our curricula in ways that make sense to our sending districts, so that we're articulating proficiencies both in our technical content area, academic content area, and transferable skill areas in ways that are really portable for students, that can be translated across those organizations.
So you would see that that is our third major area of work. So we're looking at the PLC as an opportunity to continue the work that we've been working on for a while, and also introduce new work that we have taken on as priorities. I want to point out that the proficiency-based work has been going on for 2 years now, and we continue to build upon what we know. We have gone slow in that area because we've been waiting for our sending high schools to clarify what their practice will be, and no great surprise, there are 9 high schools and there are 9 practices, or 11, depending on how you count them. So we have to both be able to we have to do the same things they're doing, because we're providing grades and transcripted credit or proficiencies, and we also have to be able to speak 9 different languages or 9 different grading formats with all of them. So it's always fun at a tech center. The other thing that we're working on center-wide is our literacy initiative. Coming off of the year that we spent as a leadership team reading Building Equity and discussing it as a group, we all went, or most of us went, to Boston in March to work as a team with the authors of Building Equity, and it became very apparent to Carolyn and I that by the end of the weekend there, the thing that we needed to do most in our center was level the playing fields for all of our students in the area of literacy. We have spent many hours and many dollars of Perkins money to try to improve the literacy skills of our students. And over the 7 years that we've been working on it, we've only moved the needle a little bit. That work has really focused at the course level or the grade level, and now we realize we actually have to change our attitude around literacy school-wide. We need to make all of our staff literacy teachers. And so we're partnering with PLL, which is Partnership for Literacy Learning, and it will be a 3-year project in which they come in the first year and review our practices and our attitudes towards literacy as an organization, feed that information back to us in digestible data, in which then we can work in PLC groups, PLC groups, to come up with both academy level action plans and center-wide action plans to improve literacy within the school. Did you have anything about that?
No, I think one of the unique factors that we face in looking at this is when you look at systematizing change. Many of our organizations have multiple years to work with students. We're looking at a rapid prototype, so some of our students are with us for only a year, and we want to move the needle for those students. Some of our students we have the benefit of multiple years with them, so we want to think about a progressive approach for those students. So, you know, we need to be functioning at a lot of different levels, and we haven't always, as secondary teachers, thought and planned in those ways, so we're really eager to get to that work.
So I'm going to wrap up with our celebrations. Look for an article in the Reporter hopefully tomorrow. We hosted the governor's work group. I guess they call themselves the Capital for a Day group. Last week we had 9 different cabinet members or important folks from Montpelier come up and spend anywhere from an hour and a half to 3.5 hours touring the center with us. The focus is on the role of career and tech ed centers in improving workforce development within Vermont. It was a really exciting 3 hours with some of them and an hour with others. You cannot see the center in an hour, that's for sure. But I assure you that our students and our teachers represented the district very well, and I think that it will be a very solid article that comes out about the center and the work that we're doing to play a role in workforce development. We also had a Teacher of the Year yesterday. Chrissy Smith is at the Center for Technology Essex 2018 UVM Teacher of the Year. She's an English teacher who's been working with us for about 10 years now.
And a PLC leader.
And a PLC leader.
Oh, yeah.
I gave you back in time.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you to all of you. That was informative and inspiring. I will ask board members if they have any questions or comments.
So I guess I need explain I'm 5 years old. Not being, obviously an educator, what's the difference between PBIS versus responsive classroom versus developmental design, which are 3 terminologies that I've had, put out there, and I know PBIS, but I'm assuming that there has to be a difference between them. Can you give me a layman's version of why, obviously it's, we have different programs in different schools, so I'm not sure if it's, this fits better for us or...
Let me take a stab at it.
Sure.
Pre-K principal. Responsive classroom and developmental design are very similar in their approaches. Responsive classroom are strategies and an approach to teaching students about social and emotional learning. And it's targeted toward elementary age students. Developmental design is a similar approach, but thinking about the developmental needs of middle school kids and how they're different. PBIS is a framework, and PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Instruction. So it's a system of support. Within that, it doesn't require you to pick a particular kind of program to implement that. So lots of schools across Vermont are responsive classroom schools. And I would say there are, I don't know, how many PBIS schools now, Suzanne? The last number I saw was astronomical. I would say probably somewhere in the 80%. So PBIS is a framework, and responsive classroom and developmental design or restorative practices are strategies within that framework. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And to be a PBIS school, you have to have a vote of your entire faculty and staff that endorses it. 80% or higher.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, that's helpful. Any other comments or questions? I have a quick one from Rob. I was thinking about PLPs. the fact that we're using ball across our district. We have quite a few students who are tuitioned in from other districts. Is there a way to work with them, at least in 8th grade, so that that transition of PLPs is easier?
So there will be a conversation when we travel, typically in December, to Grand Isle, because they host a high school fair, and I usually meet with administrators up there, and I will broach the subject with them at that point to see what type of connection we can make before they step foot in the school in August to get the ball rolling.
In Georgia as well?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. That one, Georgia's usually in January.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Anything else, Kim?
I was thinking about the Bulb platform and the targets to be done before conferences, and remembering the middle school days of student-led conferences, and parents, I'm guessing, are going to see them then, and wondering for parents of high schoolers if there's any sort of expectation that students will be sharing where they are around that same time frame.
In October?
Yeah, I think I saw that the About Me thing
Yeah.
is done in October or something.
We're going to have the students share with the parents the About Me page,
Mhm.
but the specific goal setting in terms of career, academic goals, et cetera, that'll be most likely in November when they get to that. So it'll be a work in progress, and to follow up on where I think your train of thought is going, we're looking at, in the spring conference date, the sophomores would present during the spring parent-teacher conferences with their advisor during that time period,
Like to
as
their-
a starting point.
I was just thinking, will there be, like, I don't know, whether advisory tells students, share with your parents, because I know that sometimes the student-led part of the middle school conference really happened at home, and I know high school kids are different than middle school kids. I just didn't know how that interaction that's required with PLPs, with parents' involvement, is going to have a format to sort of both encourage and hold kids accountable for that interaction.
Well, we're looking to have October 15th as the date that they would share with the parent.
Okay, Kevin?
I was just going to add on to what Rob was saying, and I'm sure Eric mentioned this last week or 2 weeks ago. We met as a cohort. So was it maybe around a month ago?
Yeah.
A month and a half ago now? It was end of summer. We met with the middle school teachers, a handful, as well as the high school teachers. And the administrators met. And we aligned what we're doing together. And that's been really helpful. And then what came out of it was this message, and I don't know, I think it was Carrie who said we're going slow to go fast, is to be really thoughtful about our process. So yes, so the All About Me is actually, the goal is here in a couple of weeks to share those out. But also at that time is have conversations, to begin the conversations with parents. What is a goal you might have for your son or daughter over this year? So and then methodically teaching kids how to set goals, because that's not something that's the norm. So doing that, just like the high school will be looking at November, is we'll be doing that all together strategically so that we have really powerful PLPs.
I just wanted to say, as someone who served on the Essex Town School Board, who chaired the Red Study Committee and now serves on this board, it is really inspiring to see the collaboration and the connection that's happening across the district. So I just want to commend all of you for the great work you're doing.
I'm sure from all of us. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Keep up the great work. All right, so now we have to move on to finances, and we are going to have I'm just going to step out for a second. An end of year review for FY18. And Brian, do you want to
Absolutely.
start us? Thank
Well,
you.
I'd like to introduce you to Kathleen Barron. Kathleen is the Director of Finance and Accounting, and for all practical purposes operates the district as the business manager position within the district. This is my second tour of duty working with Kathy.
Yep.
And I continue to be utterly impressed and at awe with her quantity and quality and level of work and the amount of dedication that she gives to the district. Much of what you have as an organization depends upon the shoulders, the very broad shoulders of Kathy to get us through this merger. I think it's an underestimated amount of administrative minutia that goes into a merger, and the fact that few people know about it is because few people do it so well. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Well said.
Well, we're going to start off with kind of the first year, how we started, where we're headed, and you know, what's in between. So for the first year, we kind of had to capture. Oh, I have to use this.
Yes.
Hold on a second. So, here we go.
Is it too close to that one?
That was just mood music right there. That was Bill.
Well, when it comes to finances, you sort of need to go into a yoga mode because it can be a little boring. So, Barry from glazing over here. So in the first year, we kind of had to consolidate all the beginning balances from 5 districts into 1 district. Create our fund balances, both assigned and unassigned. Create a single budget. And then we had FY18's, our budget to actuals, and we're going, including for today, our enterprise funds. We're not going to cover the special revenues or the agency funds. We can do that at another time. But, you know, the important pieces we're going to cover tonight. Brian, that didn't all fit on there. What-
Well, it looked beautiful on the others when I looked at it.
Put that in there.
Oh. It was thinking. Oh, it has animation. Look at, aren't you fancy?
I thought it just kind of merged in there. So kind of what I wanted to represent, I kind of did a funnel. And so that, and the order I put the districts in was basically those that ended with a, with their fund balance. This is very difficult to read from a distance. So I'll start with Essex Junction School District, ended FY17 with a fund balance of $1.3 million. U46 ended with a $1.2 million. Essex, Westford School District, $466,000. Essex Town with $104,000, and the SU had ended with a deficit. And, which is a good thing for an SU. They should not have a fund balance anyway. So a small deficit's not a bad thing. It basically, that year was the merger year, and all the merger costs funneled to the SU. So there was a lot of costs that we didn't anticipate, and so they kind of ate into the fund balance that we had from 16 and pretty much, you know, kind of wiped it out. Off to the side, I have EJRP, because they didn't come forward with us. They kind of went off into their own municipality. So, and they did take with them their fund balance, which with all their funds, their special revenue, their capital, they ended up with a fund balance of $191,000 that they were able to take and move to start their new life moving forward. So all those 5 balls kind of, and I excluded the tech center because they stay as a separate entity, a district. So they funneled all down into the new EWSD. So collectively, it's a $3.1 million fund balance that we brought into the new district for July 1 of 2017. Now, of that fund balance, money was set aside, it was earmarked. We had some non-spendables, and non-spendables are your prepaids, things that were paid in FY '17, but they were for FY '18. So we move them on the balance sheet, and they become a prepaid, but we have to set that aside in our fund balance. We had an assigned of 1.5 million, which was the money that we agreed when we did the budget for FY '18 would help be the carry forward money to help offset the taxes in that year, which left us with an unassigned of about 1.5 million. And we actually had that earmarked also, about 1.4 million of it for FY '19. So it kind of took care of that fund balance. And it's always a fluid amount anyway, because when you are looking at it 2 years in advance and setting it aside, you never know what you're going to end up with for a fund balance, so it does change a little bit. So that was the number we moved into the new district with. So then we presented some documents to you, I think, ahead of time. So I was just going to kind of go over some of the revenues first and some of the highlights for the revenues. On the ed spending fund, there was a kind of a loss of about 500 and, actually,
Oh, no, so she's gonna rely on, do you want a hard copy?
You want your
so the ed spending fund, you saw a net deficit of 530,000, and that money is for the healthcare recapture. So we had to pay back to the state the money for the health insurance. The excess cost is included in the tuition, and we never really know what that's going to be. We budgeted 30,000, but that's cost that sending districts, whatever their children need for needs, we bill them back. So that's actually offset by an expenditure. Charges for services, when you look at that $1 million, that is the money that the tech center pays us for services, for property services, for guidance, library. In the past, we had done it as a offsetting expenditure, and Brian and I decided that it's more transparent to have it as a revenue, so that you see the money that is coming in from the tech center into the budget. The federal and state, those are, again, if you notice, the adjusted budget is always a little different than the voter improved. We never know what we're going to get for state and federal grants. So when we find out what our award is, we adjust the adjusted column for that, but we only get what we use. So they're all reimbursable grants. So if we don't spend it, we don't ask for it. So that's why you'll see a little bit of a deficit, but that also corresponds to the expenses. So if we don't ask for it, the expenses will be lower because they're equal. You'll notice that the fund balance carryover is the 1.5. We don't bring that in as a revenue because it is in the fund balance. It is just a kind of more of a bookmark as to that is money that we're putting towards the total revenue, but we never move it out of fund balance. It's an accounting entry. The rest of the, like other income, that's E-rate, EPSDT, they're smaller amounts. And we did have, on the rentals, we did have a little extra this year because the bus barn is revenue that we receive over at the town of about $14,000 to have the company house their buses over there. So that's kind of the highlight on the revenues.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I understand where I'm reading. You have budget amounts, original, final, and actual?
Yes.
So original is the budgeted figure that we presented to the public.
Correct. That's the voter approved.
Final is?
Adjusted.
Adjusted. And actual is?
What we actually got.
Okay.
That's the money that actually came in the door. Yep.
The favorable variance is based off of the final budget? So
Yeah,
it's,
some of them weren't quite adding up, but I figured it was terminology.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at final to the variance, you could see a variance between, that's, it's somewhere I have to look through here. It's in one case there was, so I was looking earlier online. Okay, it's a lot easier for me to actually look at something from page to page versus electronic. It starts to go a little wavy on you. That some of the numbers, I looked at it and said, how can you have a variance? There is no variance. You can't be zero. But it is zero.
Diane, are you saying that the number, the variance in, for instance, intergovernment state appears to be between the final and actual line?
Well, let's take instructional staff here, down halfway down the page. It's $2,000 for the budget. Final is zero. The actual is zero. So the variance is zero?
Yes.
The variance is the difference between final and actual.
Actual, right.
The original doesn't calculate. So if the
Right.
final is zero and the actual is zero, the variance is zero.
Right, I understand. It was a matter of terminology for me to understand,
Right.
you know, what I was seeing and going, I said, wait a minute, somebody's got to explain what the, 1 plus 1 plus 1x
Okay.
is, and what's the 1x part,
So
So
you
now
have it now.
Now I understand better.
Okay, great. Kathy?
So we're going to move on to the expenditures. Now, the expenditures, the way this report is written is by function. So it's going to give you everything that happens to be in regular ed and special ed, which includes personnel costs and non-personnel costs. But rather than try to dissect each one, I thought maybe I'd just do an overview of the personnel costs and where we ended up. So we did have a savings of about $415,000. And that was an overall savings of unlicensed directors, stipends budgeted but were unspent, IA savings of about $140,000, and then substitutes were up by $125,000. And a lot of that is, it might be the teachers might have been overspent, but then the IA was underspent. So those positions kind of are moved around after we, get into the year and see where the needs are. Now benefits, I'm going to break this down a little bit more because the biggest piece of that is the health insurance. We had a savings of $1.1 million in health insurance. But we have to remember that we had to pay back $530,000 in recapture. So that brings the remaining benefit down to $621,000. Out of that, we have the new HRAs, and it's a huge unknown. We really are not sure what it's going to cost. I don't know if you're aware of the year we had with our third-party providers. I'm sure you do. So we don't, again, this has been a really tough year. This FY18 was very rough, trying to figure out all the contracts and all the bargaining units and where everything is going to land in FY18. Hope 19, we're looking ahead, it's going to be good. But there's just been a lot of things that, and I really feel like I need to put something on the books as a liability for the HRAs, but we don't know yet what that amount should be, so I'm going to work with our external auditors, get their feel of what would be a reasonable amount to set aside for claims that we know are from the past that we haven't received notification yet or we haven't been billed for. So that one's kind of a, like 621 sounds like a lot of money that we were left with, but not knowing with what the plans are going to, and we did have some savings, which is what we were supposed to have, when we went to the new plan. Tuition reimbursement, we saved a little bit there, $109,000. People didn't use it, but it carries forward, so if they didn't use it this year, they are able to carry that benefit forward. The other ones are workers' comp, FICA, and about $286,000 there, but that corresponds with a reduction in salaries. So if we saved $415 in salaries, it's going to have lower effects on the FICA and the workers' comp and the unemployment. So non-personnel costs, I kind of broke that down into purchase services. We had a savings of $188,000. Maintenance was about $83,000, and the bulk of that was we do most of our own internal work, so we don't have as much need to hire outside sources. The big cost, transportation. I figured that, the years go up. About $756,000 in savings. Now, the bulk of that is the regular ed residents, which was $738,000. And we expected that. There was about a $67,000 savings in special ed and about $16,000 in non-resident pre-K. And the balance is field trips, athletics that they didn't use some of the dollars. So we did have some savings there. Telecommunications, $33,000, and that one's kind of an interesting object these days because the states decided that telecommunications could be any book that you get off the internet, whereas we think of it as more online internet stuff. So that gets coded under telecommunications. Travel conference, we saved a little bit there, $69,000. And again, it's kind of working through people knowing what's available for them to take or whether they go on conferences and tuition, we saved about $86,000 there. Special ed costs were over budget, but then they were balanced out by underspending in Westford, who had grandfathered students, but that's decreasing every year. So that amount will go down. We did have outside placements that were over budget by $542,000, but those are offset by the LEAs that send the children to our schools. That includes excess costs. Supplies, $164,000. Books, about $77,000. And utilities, we saved about $128,000 in natural gas and electricity. And to get the supplies and the books, I look at it and I wish we could have done a little better of spending it because there's a need. But again, I think it's people getting comfortable and used to a new culture and a new environment as to what their monies are and who's supposed to be spending it and how it's supposed to be spent. So I think 19 will be a smoother transition, and Brian and I will be able to interact with them a little better and say, if you need this, it's available. Yeah. And there was just so much going on all the time that we didn't have that time to sit and do what we'd like to do with everybody. And that's help them spend their money where they need it the most. So that's in a nutshell. We did, let me cover this. We did provide a subsidy to child nutrition. That was voted in. That was $108,712. We had, by federal law, we have to cover any deficit that food service child nutrition ends the year in. So we covered $112,282 for the deficit they ended the year with. And then we did have a small loan that we paid to Essex Town, $20,000. That was our other transfers out. And that's pretty much in a nutshell of the general fund. Any questions on that before I go over to CTE?
Do you have a fund balance number?
In this sheet?
I do, actually. Yeah. There we go. So for Essex Westford, we began with a $3.19 thousand fund balance. That's the one I showed you in the beginning. Mm-hmm. We did end up with a fund balance because we didn't use any of that $3 million, and we actually added to it. So we have a $6 million fund balance.
And there's some committed.
There is, and that's
Or some assigned.
the 1.4 million is a committed amount for FY19 out of the 6 million.
But the 6 million is after you transferred the 1.5 for FY18.
Yes, that is.
Or
yes. Yes.
Make whatever entry you have to make to account for it.
Yes, what it does is it takes the revenues and the expenses and nets it, and that adds to the current fund balance. And with the current fund balance of $3 million, we added to it and brought it to 6. We do have assigned amount for FY '19 of the 1.4 million. So you would subtract that off that 6 million.
This will be a number that Kathy will be working with the auditors, will go to a final audited basis, and then this becomes a big building block in our budget process. And it can also become a building block in any kind of committed or signed or board assigned or going into reserving through voter approval.
Questions, comments?
Food services, I know the $108,000 subsidy was probably made or as a part of the budget process. But when I look at the line items of the deficits during the year, they're quite a bit more than that.
For child nutrition?
Mhm.
And we're going to cover child nutrition. Do you want to wait till we get to that one
Sure.
under the enterprise?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
So right now, you're just asking for questions on the main general fund.
On the general
budget.
fund, and, yeah,
Okay.
no.
Anything else?
My question is, you mentioned about paying Essex Town.
Mhm.
So what did you pay them?
Well, it was at the end of the year, there were not enough money in their checking account to cover some of the bills because they were waiting for receivables to come in. So we loaned them $20,000 from the EWSD, future ESWD, to cover their expenses. And then the money came in for the receivables, but at that point, there was no sense in paying it back because they were now EWSD. But it shows on the books as a transfer out for that time period. So, yeah, it was just,
But the money is actually still in EWS.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, so it went
Yeah.
into like a side account for former Essex Town School District?
No, it doesn't
Not Essex
exist.
Town
It doesn't
Municipal?
exist.
Right, it doesn't exist anymore, so on July 1, they had still bills that had to be paid for that were as of June 30th, but there was not enough money in the checking account. So we just made a loan into that account to cover those while they waited for their receivables to come in. You know, by the time the SEER gets done, you get money to come in that covers FY17 expenses, but the checkbook isn't covered. So we just did that, and then they became all of us. We're all, so everything just kind of meshed together.
So in the budget, there were dollars assigned for transportation that were not ultimately used because our plans didn't go as we had hoped. Can you just remind us what happens with that money?
That goes into the fund balance.
As part of the fund balance? Okay. About how much is that?
For all of the transportation, about $756,000. Yeah.
With transportation not being expended as projected, that actually will impact 2 years from now on the reimbursement? Because it's only, the reimbursement's
We'll have
only
less-
based on actuals.
Right, we'll have less expenses that our districts incurred, so we'll get less reimbursement.
Right, but then that impacts future budget as a revenue.
It's a
Correct.
2-year average.
Yep.
Right,
Yeah. Okay.
But we cut up that money in fund balance. Any other questions on the general fund budget? Okay, we want to go to the capital and then.
So I was going to cover CTE.
CTE, okay.
Yeah. Their budget, when they came into the new year, was, they had a non-spendable fund balance of about $12,000. The auditors called them, and the format that I've used kind of replicates what the auditors will put in the annual report, and so I wanted to continue with that format just to make it familiar. So they actually call CT restricted funds because you can't have two general funds. So it's just wording, but it really is kind of the same thing as our assigned. So they had a restricted fund of $535,000 for a total of $547,000. We had assigned for FY18 for the tech center $289,000. So that kind of left them with a balance of $258,000 going into FY18. So their revenues, and they're so easy compared to the other one. So they, again, also had to, you probably see a $72,000 deficit or negative variance in their ed spending. They also felt the impact of the healthcare recapture. So that was their portion that they were dinged for. Their tuition income, their FTEs are going down a little bit, so that's reflective in the money they receive in from sending districts. Charges for services, I was trying to remember what charges.
I think those are all their culinary and
Oh, yes, that's the
auto
money they
and
came from
dental
Pro
and-
Foods and Cosmo and when they sell services. Yes, thank you. The same goes with the state and federal. If their grant award comes in, we adjust the final depending on what their award is, but if they don't use it, we don't ask for it. So the federal, which is Carl Perkins, was down by, 53,000, but that's reflected in the expenses also.
Some of those awards are able to be rolled forward so that they're able to be then expended in future years. Some
Yeah.
grants aren't roll forward, so there are strategies at times to make sure that you use dollars that you could lose while you roll over dollars that you could reinvest in subsequent years.
Yep. Fund balance is not pulled down, so that will be a negative $289,000 variance, but it was available for use. Their salaries, again, reflective of the fact that their FTEs are down a little bit. So they had a savings in licensed educators of about $123,000. Their health insurance, again, was a savings of $192,000, but if you subtract out the $72,000 recapture, that brings it kind of in line with the same thing with HRAs. Their FICA, workers' comp, all the other benefits, they saved about $24,000, and that is in line with a reduction in salary costs. Their purchase services, they had a variance of about $24,000, and that was primarily adult college skill tech and their program improvement. So I would imagine that is because their programs numbers were down. So when the numbers are down, they don't have the expenses. So there would be, from a budgeted point of view, a savings from what they originally thought they were going to budget, they didn't spend. Maintenance of grounds of $64,000. Electricity, natural gas, those costs were down. Their transportation and communication, I'm talking about travel conference type things, they saved $17,000. That was primarily in program improvement. Their supplies were a variance of about $50,000. The bulk of that was in program improvement and cosmetology. The books, they had a savings of about $12,000. That was in the companion and cosmetology. And again, utilities, natural gas, electricity, and gas. So they did do a transfer out. Skill Tech, over the last couple of years, ran into a deficit issue. But talking with Bob, and I asked him why we had a deficit issue, it was more that he felt that some of the expenses that were charged to Skill Tech really should have been shared with the general fund for their adult college skill tech program. So we, rather than do a lot of decreasing of the expenses in there, we did a transfer out to cover the expense in skill tech to bring them back into the black, which they're required anyway to do that in an enterprise fund. So we transferred out from his fund balance $108,000. So CTE's beginning fund balance was $547. They ended the year, they did not use their fund balance either, that was set forward, and they ended with $602,000 fund balance. And they do have money committed for FY19 out of that amount.
Questions? Okay.
Capital. Oh dear, capital. Had a problem with capital this year. As you know, I didn't do the budget quite right, so I don't know if you want to say I saved the taxpayers $1 million, or if we are not able to do capital by $1 million. But we have committed currently $1.3 million. Now, out of that, though, we had, over the years, when we had the state aid construction money that we took in, a lot of you remember from the high school, U46, that money was set aside to cover bond payments over a period. So that money is actually earmarked, $845,000, for that purpose. Then we also have our bond defeasance, which about $58,000 a year is set to also offset the principal interest and stuff on our one campus and our debt at the high school level. So that leaves our carryover for the actual capital construction of about $352,000. And we have expenses that we're covering of that, so. That a lot of the, with capital, it can carry over from one fiscal year to the other, unlike the general fund that dies at midnight on the 30th, and theirs doesn't, it kind of carries over. As Roger Derby used to say, it turns into a pumpkin at midnight, yeah. So this is some costs that, projects that were not completed in FY '18 that will be finished in FY '19, so. That was capital, short and sweet, but what do you have for questions on that one?
Well, I guess we'll talk about this at budget time, but is it possible that we can use our fund balance to cover that $1 million shortfall? Because we didn't ask for that money from the state.
I think there are some possibilities there. I also don't think the number's necessarily $1 million, because as Kathy said, we had some carryover, there was some funding. We did a large project that was able to be priced really attractively, the roof on the high school. So Kathy has to us a promise to come back after working with the external auditors to kind of give an entire schedule. The board still is due kind of an explanation of all the ins and outs with regards to that. And I also think in budgeting, as I mentioned when we talked about this, our capital fund is something that has now almost a 15 or 18-year history, the idea of a special article for capital. But I think over some of those years, we've kind of grown to having it be sort of a budget part 2 for general maintenance. And I think it goes back to some of the comments when I first met you, Martha, is to what degree do people save up to do projects over time, to having those projects benefit people in the future and having people in the future pay for them. So I think there's quite a bit, and would love to bring in some external expertise in the community, our bankers and others that could help
So
us.
we'll wait for that.
So now we're going to get into the enterprise funds. We have 5 enterprise funds. We have child nutrition, we have skill tech, we have the RINC, we have the PDI, and the
What's
one,
that stand for?
professional development and mentoring. And we do have the CTE Corp, which doesn't have a balance sheet. Well, I shouldn't say that. It doesn't have an income statement because everything for that is in CIP, construction in progress. So I didn't include it today, but we can talk about it at some time, what their outstanding fund balance is. So I'm going to start with child nutrition. So they began in the hole, moving into FY18 of $11,461. Through the year, they ended up with a deficit that constituted what we moved forward, the $112,000, to cover what they ended with. So they actually right now have a 0 fund balance because we brought them to 0, which by federal law we have to do. I think I gave you a sheet on them.
Yeah.
I did. Basically, there's not much I can say about them, other than, this is the services they provide, this is what it cost, and this is how we ended up. So, I don't, if you have any questions for me on that, I can get more information on it. I think the,
Yeah, there may be higher interest in things like, how is our participation rate, and have we
Right.
compared them? Kathy looks a little bit more through the GAP, or generally accepted accounting practice
The
lens.
numbers, yeah.
But we could have them, the child nutrition folks, come in.
Okay, Kim, Keely, Diane.
I think FINDOT is probably one of the ones that I'm curious about, but I'm wondering from a pure funding standpoint, I know the getting the paperwork completed for folks to be part of the free and reduced program, what kind of success have we had with that and with Medicaid, and are there, I mean, those being more pure numbers issues, where do we stand on that, or do we know? Or is that for a later time?
Yeah, to get those numbers of like, where do we stand, what's that percentage of overall, and so forth. I mean, the financial reports are more in that, there was the capture of revenue that was anticipated, but I think that what you can also see is that there's increased food costs.
Mm-hmm.
And those are some of the, you know, as we move some of the commodities, and also as there's continued focus on Buy American and other areas like that, those are some pressures on both sides of the thing, as well as benefits with regards to timing of breakfast and whether it puts people into benefit situations to carry through to the end of lunch, and managing labor and so forth. Which is one of the key things we've done going into FY19, is eliminate an administrator in that program.
Right. I mean, if we look at the revenues for child nutrition, they were over what they originally budgeted by, 73,000.
Mm-hmm.
But we get down to the expenses, and that outweighs what they were able to bring in for lunches or for federal commodities, and those are all pulled into this. So unfortunately, just the expenses are outweighing the revenues.
Wait, sorry. Keely.
I just wondered what à la carte is.
They get to, you get to go and pick and choose. Usually the adults go in, they'll say, I want a salad, or I want this, and they get charged by the whatever it is they choose. If they buy a bagel, or if they buy yogurt, it's those pieces, not the students.
It doesn't constitute a reimbursable meal.
Right.
So somebody may be buying a yogurt parfait, is not qualify as a lunch, but it's a sale of a food item. And they call it our.
So it's not relevant to
adults and-
students?
No, it would be the snack bars here, or other things, even when if a student doesn't want to get a fruit, a milk, a juice, a starch, and a protein to be fully eligible for reimbursement, if they just want to buy just
bagel.
fruit or bagel, then again, it becomes an a la carte item.
Diane.
Okay. Kathy, you have, I could track where the 108,000 is moved from the general fund to there. Where's the other 4,000 to make the 112?
There was actually two. The first transfer was a budgeted item of the subsidy. So if you look in the other financing sources, there was 108,712. That was the subsidy that we had intended to give them. And Bob rounded it. What we had budgeted on the general fund side was 108,712. He only budgeted 108. But then when we ended the year and we had a deficit, we had an additional loss of 112,281.91, and we covered that amount from the general fund to clear out the deficit for the year. So that brought his fund balance to zero. Does that make sense? That wasn't a budgeted item. That's coming right from the fund balance in the
That's
general
coming from the
fund.
fund balance? Okay, because I
Yeah.
was trying to track where that transfer out from here, and I'm seeing 4,000, I'm seeing 108.72.
That's included in two numbers, that's, because
Two
we had a
numbers.
couple of fund transfers out, yeah.
Question?
I think the concern has been that the deficit spending in this area has been there for a very, very long time. And that it varies somewhere between 300 and 500,000, somewhere in that range. It's quite a bit of money. The administrator is no longer in that position, but my understanding, he's coming back at some point.
No.
I'm not sure.
Not to food service.
No.
And there's actually 2 administrative positions that were eliminated out of food service going into FY19.
That should help on the deficits, probably.
Should. I think it's acknowledged, and certainly I think Kathy would support this, is that I think even under generally accepted accounting practices, food service should be a department of the district and not an enterprise fund.
Right.
And if it were a true enterprise fund, it would be charged indirects. And
Right.
I would contend that there isn't a food service operation in the state that does it, because even the indirects, I mean, when a school hosts a contractor, it pays that contractor.
Right.
It doesn't charge the contractor. You know, it doesn't, you know, you give them exclusive monopoly to a population and give them facilities and equipment and custodial services and everything else to support that. So I think it's so far it has met deaf ears at the state level, but there's actually some progress happening at the federal level with regards to the federal food, school lunch and breakfast program.
It's a hard area to understand because there's so many variables, and they're dynamic, changing at different times of the year. But it's a concern, and it sounds like we're on the right track finally. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's move up.
So the Ring, they began their fund balance year with 55,000 and ended with 45,000. This is the first time in a while that Noel has had to tap into his fund balance a little bit. And he tends to, and he does budget with a little bit more in, whoops, let me go back, in revenues than he does expenses, so that he can build up his fund balance, and that philosophy is to be able to use for equipment, such as a Zamboni if it were to need some major repairs. So what he budgeted for revenues, he was under a little bit by 10,000, but that's also a difficult number to kind of pinpoint as he's creating his budget, because you never know what he's going to receive for rink use with the ice skating or the hockey teams or whatever use is in there. But his personnel costs don't change. Even if somebody doesn't use the facility, he still has to pay for those personnel costs. So he was over a little bit in personnel and benefit costs, and that left him with a negative balance from his income over his expenses of 9,700, but he was able to use that from his existing fund balance. So it still left him with a positive fund balance moving into FY19.
Questions? Okay, skill tech. So what's next? Yes.
Skill Tech, they began, as I talked about, they began the year with a negative 95,000, and I kind of explained on that Bob felt that some of the costs should have been shared, and so he did move, and you'll see on the statement that you have in front of you for that we transferred in the 108,000 to put them into the black, but also to give them a small fund balance so that they would have some money moving forward to meet their expenses. And they have a new director that's working diligently to grow the Skill Tech, and I think FY19 we're going to see some positive movement there.
Okay.
PDI and mentoring is professional development, and I don't know if you know what PDI, how they get their money into, for the enterprise. They contract with, for this year, it's Southern New England,
Hampshire. Southern New Hampshire
Southern New
University.
Hampshire University, and at a much lower rate than what other providers, institutions are charging. So the difference that we would have paid for those, the tuition that everyone is entitled to, the difference is used to go into PDI and mentoring, and that money is used for additional professional development. So they had 33,000, they were able to add a little bit more to it, so they ended with a positive 45,000 that is being utilized for professional development and mentoring.
We offer our own courses. So like Ellen Thompson's offers courses, Amy Cole's offers courses. So it's within the system, so it's our own professional development, but making money so students, or the teachers as students, can get credit through Southern New Hampshire University.
Questions?
About the contract. So this would be for those type of courses. This isn't necessarily where, or is it, where all reimbursements for courses taken at St. Mike's or UVM would be
Yeah, it's
going
part of
through
that.
here?
They could do that because they're getting their college credit.
And all of that is operated not
Not all
within
of
the
it,
general
yeah.
budget? Okay.
No.
So the other stuff would be within the general budget. This is just separate for the purposes of being able to bring some of that in-house?
Yes.
Okay.
And their courses are designed by our own district.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about doing more PLC training, and if we had somebody on district, or Stacy Mead being the responsive classroom trainer, we could actually offer a course through her, and that could be through this pot of money.
Got it.
It just gets turned over in the system.
Yep.
It's a great way to do professional development. I have never been a part of it. I think it's amazing.
And it's the difference, it's not
Yeah.
the full amount.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever the costs are with the revenues, it's just the difference that gets used towards more professional development.
Thank you.
And that's the end of my presentation. I don't know.
Thank you, Kathy.
Nobody fell asleep, nobody glazed over, that's awesome.
We are so grateful to have you doing the work you're doing. Thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah. And like Brian said, in the future, we can get into some more of the questions and details. You tell us what you'd like from us for information. I'm more than happy to put that together for you. We weren't sure, so we said, well, let's start with this, and it'll be a beginning, and then we can.
We have a very large growth mindset when it comes to financial reporting.
In that regard, Brian, do you have a sense of when the audit may be finished?
We're going to, now that the dust has settled a little bit for everything else that's been going on, I'm going to get the information off to our auditors. They'll come in at the end of October, and first part of November, and I'm hoping they'll move it quite quickly. It's not gonna be an easy audit, mostly because they're taking 6 districts now and trying to audit them as in our FY18 format. They have to look at the audit from the Essex town and say, okay, bring that forward. They did the audits for us, so that's a little easier for them, but it's a compilation of all those into FY18, and so I'm hoping it'll go. They were in for their preliminary at the end of July, and thought things went really well. So I'm hoping that continues that way, that it goes really well. So, yeah.
Should line up well with our budget, and we'll probably also want to look to see how the board involves themselves with the external audit. I'm not sure what tradition has been for. I know it was a rather arm's length distance for the U46, so.
Same for Westford. We received the reports. I think I'll just speak personally, the only time the board would have to have a discussion is if there are, what if they
Findings?
Findings, recommendation, yeah.
We don't like findings. No. What are they called? Something deficiencies.
Material weaknesses.
Material weaknesses. So I think if that happened, we would definitely want to have a conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
You will.
And my second question is, will we start to receive quarterly financials? And I think it's really helpful to have the material before we get to the meeting. So if we can do that, I would appreciate it. Yeah. I'm sure we all would. Okay, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Okay, so we moved the transportation update to the next item. We're very far behind. No surprise there.
Only 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Can you pass those around? Do you want to kick off?
Sure.
Oh wait, I didn't get one.
I need one too.
Actually, I probably have it just in my head.
I don't know. So yes, this is what's coming around is implementation of our student transportation plan, status of where we're at, and some updates for you. And we organized it according to, after reading the notes from the subcommittee, wanting wins, action items, challenges, and threats. We've organized the notes in that way, and also shared, again, some other information that's already been shared with you, but we thought that it would be helpful. So some wins that we're seeing and have been seeing and probably have already talked to you about in the efforts to improve student safety and efficiency. We did have a modification in our routes schedule, and I had a board member ask, were they necessary? Yes, a lot of them were about student safety and where the position of that route was. So that happened for Essex Elementary, the middle school founders, and then the high school families that are receiving the transportation, that are currently receiving. We still are continuing with the Green Mountain Transit Program, and it's expanded to all middle school students, which is exciting. Even into Essex Middle School. I talked to one parent how their daughter is using that. And then updating the schedule and routes also allows to better advertise that Essex High School has a bus service for 100% of our students who live in the area. So being able to combine what we provide through Mountain Transit and the Green Mountain Transit, 100% are being served. Supporting families through the changes in schedules and routes. Jamie and support staff from the technology department have a call center set up, and it's from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. and there's a schedule there, and parents know that schedule so they can call in. I actually wondered where he was talking from today when I couldn't find him, and he was in the call center. So reference checks are underway for new bus monitors. Jamie's been riding a bus who has need extra support, and he's been taking his time to ride that bus. I often see him walking out of the bus parking lot, getting off a different bus, which I think is great that he has ridden the buses, and also to do some of the reschedule or rerouting. He rode buses to check those out also. Jamie's launched an Info Finder Eye, which is a tool for families to find their stops and timing. It reminds me of an Uber. You'll know where the bus is. If you've ever used Uber, you can look at the map and you can see the little car moving. Well, it would be the same kind of thing. You could know when your bus is arriving. And then the Info Finder LE is for the school administrators and the front office staff to have real-time access to where the buses are also, and the transportation database so that they can access that. And then the current recruitment efforts weekly. Ben told me he receives messages through Facebook or emails about people wanting and inquiring about bus driving, being a bus driver. So he continues to send those on to Mountain Transit. So those are the wins that we feel we've accomplished. Some action items, the transportation survey to the Essex Junction families will be distributed by October 10th. And we'll provide families at least 1 week to respond. The thing with surveys is you don't want to give families too much time because then they forget. So a week we feel is a good amount of time to have responses. And then those will be entered into TransFinder as the responses are being received. And then it's our intent to analyze that information and get back to the board. And hopefully our intent is to analyze all that by October 31st and bring that the beginning of November to you in our first meeting. Busing for the eligible outside the walking areas for Hiawatha, Summit, Fleming, and ADL students in the district is our top priority. The next priority we'll focus on. And as we, so we'll continue to refine that and work with those schools. The district will approach the expansion of services by clustering K-5 grades. We originally came to you thinking about K-3. We've really put a lot of thought into that and think it's more realistic to do a K-5 all at once because of the families and the way they get on a bus and the neighborhoods, the way that it's set up. It makes more sense to transport K-5 and do the 3 schools, Hiawatha, Summit, and Fleming. That would take 4 drivers to do that. So we need 4 drivers to come on board before that starts to happen. But in the meantime, and I'll talk a little bit about as the driver status, but as we have a driver come through, we can put them on the routes, practicing the routes, riding on buses, getting familiar with our standards and how our transportation works at EWSD, and Jamie can do some training with them also. So each new driver will be doing 2 routes to serve those 3 schools. Transportation will be grouped by Hiawatha and then Summit Fleming. The 2 performing routes that each group will result, there's going to be different arrival times, just as they're in our current system. Bus drop-offs will be anywhere we're thinking before it's actually gone out, but that's what we're thinking is between 7:15 and 7:45 that buses will come through to drop off kids at school, the students. Let's see, am I missing anything in that, Brian?
Just then, when the next 2 available drivers are ready, they'll be deployed in the junction. These 2 drivers, bringing a total to 6, add the capacity necessary to fully serve the K-8 students outside of walking zones in Essex Junction.
So after the K-5 with 4, 2 more needed to then serve ADL. And then some of the high school students also within that, outside the mountain transit walking zone and the walking zones around the school.
And ultimately, all the drivers will be serving. It brings the total capacity to the necessary amount.
We're meeting, Brian and I are meeting with Rob Reardon and Bob Travers on October 10th to begin mapping out that process. And I know that Rob has had a lot of conversations with his staff. They're reading that. A lot of them, administrators, including Brian and I, are reading, what's it called? Why Sleep?
Why Sleep Matters?
Why Sleep Matters, to try to get the basis behind the start and stop times. So he does want students involved in that. I don't know when we meet, we'll find out how far he's progressed on that and getting a group of students. And then it's really important that we involve Bob Travers, as before you know, that's why we kind of put a halt to that, or we did put a halt to that time change because of they said up to 11 sending schools. So that's pretty important that we tie that in and have those conversations. So that'll happen next Wednesday. Where we are right now, here's some challenges. The driver's status, we have 2 drivers that are for the final testing, 1 tomorrow and then 1 on October 10th. So that's 2 drivers if that all goes well. There's 2 taking their permit test on October 10th, which then moves their license out into the middle of November.
Says the 4th.
Oh, sorry, the 4th. And then My eyes went to the one above.
Yeah.
On the 4th, and then that moves out until November, the middle of November, before they could get their CDL. 5 are in the pipeline, and most likely 2 or 3 out of that 5 will continue and follow all the way through. That's about the percentage that happens with that, to get their CDL and their school bus certification. So all that together, there's probably 6. I mean, and this is all, as you know, one could not go through, and then we've lost this whole thing. But we're putting this out there to let you know this is what's in the pipeline. We can keep our fingers and toes crossed that they all go well. So that's the number of 6 altogether, looking like by late November, early December would be able to do that, the transportation. And this is our hope, this is our intent. If we're held to these dates, I'm sorry if something happens or a driver fails and we can't do it. This is what we plan though. This is our 30-day plan. So some of the things we're working with that are still threats. We're working with the Colchester School District on the island in Georgia. We have been, Amy Miner and I are pretty much in constant contact about that. She had a lot of parents that were upset because their students had to wait for S6. I'm sorry, Amy Miner at Colchester.
She's the
superintendent. Sorry. The superintendent. So they had a lot of parents upset that kids had to wait for Essex High School, although Essex High School is getting up a little early. So they each had to adjust. Mountain Transit has worked on time, so there isn't a wait anymore for anybody, or it's minimal. It's like a 10-minute wait maybe. So they've been working to improve that too. She hasn't had any complaints since the new times, and I talked to her today. And then we also have 2 ADL students from the islands that are using, there's a driver that is one of our own on staff that's using a rental van to drive them home. Not here in the morning, they take the bus in, and then they go home in the van. And then other information we did put back out for information is the walking path around the schools to remind you of that distance. And I think that the subcommittee wanted that. Did you have that on your list, or did we just think you would want it?
I think we did.
It's one of the
I think
procedures.
we had this information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's helpful to see it again, though.
Okay. Questions?
Thank you, Beth. Questions, comments from board members?
Thank
Keely, Brenda and I stopped you before, so I'm going to get that. Thank you.
So as we add drivers, is there like a magic way that new buses appear? Like how does that part of it work where do we have buses waiting in the wings and just the drivers needed to fill the seats? Is that what it is?
The contractor has assured us that the availability of buses isn't going to hold us up.
So based on the timeline you shared, if everything were to work out perfectly, we would be able to expand busing to the junction by early December.
Yes.
Right.
Keely?
So I have a couple of questions, but I'll try to be focused. This states that busing the junction is the very next priority, but nothing will occur until we get 4 drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that we're gonna have some drivers, and potentially a driver will be sitting around not working.
Nope, we're gonna put them on buses, they can learn the routes, we'll put them on buses, they'll learn the procedures, learn our expectations of how bus drivers are. I mean, usually a bus driver is like, here's your route, see you later. These bus drivers will have extra training as they're not going to wait around. We will find a use for them.
I'm just hoping that like the use for them doesn't end up being like this Colchester thing or something, because
No, we know
they
that
don't
this,
sit around
by
not
stating
getting
it's a
paid.
priority, we will be training for that priority. Yeah.
I was interested to see the rental van solution is being used for something. I think that's good because the options of getting people who are not CDL certified are like so much vaster than restricting ourselves to CDL, and that might be something that we should consider for like the 3.5 drivers who are transporting an average of 48 high school students, that maybe some of those far-flung routes could be.
Right, and is it
vans.
6 can only fit in a van?
Five, yeah.
Five.
Five in the driver.
Without the lights and all of that. So yes, and that's one of the reason why we're taking the ridership, and we need more data on that ridership. But we have talked often in our conversations, and so you send a van out and all of a sudden you have 2 more kids that haven't ridden all year but need a ride. And then what do? Say, sorry, we can't pick you up. So then you really need, like opt out forever ridership. You can't just say, and we talked about that in the junction too. So when we send out the survey, there's really not an opt out for the junction. You're going down the neighborhood road. It doesn't matter if somebody opts out. You still, because there's a chance that someday they would get on the bus. So when you're doing bus routes, you have to assume that everybody's going to ride it.
Well, but the walking radiuses that we
Yes.
have.
Oh,
to stops,
absolutely.
There's going to be a lot
Oh,
of
yes.
streets in the junction that no bus ever goes down.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm also like going back to your van is a great idea, but there could be somebody that couldn't get on that van. There wouldn't be room for that person, and they would need a ride that day. So there's all those variables that come in. Does that make sense?
Yes. But where do we deploy the
Yes.
limited number of
Yes.
CDL people is probably where we have concentrated numbers of people.
Yep. Right. Yep.
Jay?
On the other information, are we adhering strictly to these guidelines?
We're nowhere near those guidelines.
Well, no, but the 9 through 12, the 6 through 8, that's going to be district-wide, but are we adhering strictly to that? Or, in other words, what I'm looking at is Essex Town and Westford, for instance, some of the kids are being picked up probably within a half mile of the school.
Well, it depends on the roads too. So Westford.
I'm sorry, I want to continue my question. Is, with that in mind, is that going to be are they going to discontinue, or are they going to adhere strictly to this guideline? In other words, is it the spirit or the letter that's going to be applied?
Is there a specific guideline?
Yes. Well, the 9 through 12 suggests that if they're 1.5 miles from the school, that they'll be walking. But in Westford, there's families that live within that are currently getting picked up, and I think it's the same for Essex Town.
We have a note there that each school will have that established walking radius, but if safe pedestrian travel isn't possible, and this is what we've been saying with regards to Essex Town, I think in Essex Town, there may be infrastructure that could be afforded through something like a crossing guard, opposed to something in Westford that there just isn't even shoulders to roads. So,
So lack of sidewalks, it's going to.
yeah, so we have impressed upon our policies of common sense. And this same thing is true for the walk to stops.
All right, thank you for that.
Diane?
Okay, couple things. This morning, I was listening to VPR, and it was telling me that CDL licensees for fuel trucks is now also in our competition for us. And that's statewide. Next one is, yes, I read Essex Town's snow plowing procedures, because they had a meeting yesterday, and it's, if you want to read it, it's online in their packet. But they've changed their attention to detail as to getting streets plowed so that people can walk on them. I found that humorous, and I thought I'd share. And the last one, because I don't have a sidewalk on my street, so I find it humorous. And I did go into InfoFinder today, and my grandchild lives up on Sand Hill Road, and I plugged in and said, hey, where would you catch the bus, just for grins? Put down my home address to get the response back, which I have not gotten. But I found it very humorous that she would have to walk all the way down the hill on Sand Hill Road to catch the bus when the same distance she could be at Essex Elementary School. And so I'm going to be entertained when I get a response. So I thought that was interesting and share that I don't think so. She's that it would make sense for her to walk the school versus trying to wait for the bus if she had to walk literally, 100 numbers
Put
down
in
the
the
street.
age of the child. I don't know how it works. Do you put in the age of the
I
child?
put in,
It sounds
no,
like
just
it was.
what school they're attending.
Oh.
Okay. Brendan?
Two questions. These procedures that we first looked at in June, are these still the aspirational times and distances that we're working from?
Yeah, so these are loaded into the system, and then the system, the database will allow us to see any student that has a policy variance with regards to walk to stop, walk to school, time and duration. So we can see that we have significant numbers of students that are in excess of these procedures.
Great. And then my second question was.
And can I just say,
Yeah.
and we've had that as a historical point as well. We had significant variations to standards or procedures at Essex Town, especially with the youngest students, where there was 45 or 50 minutes of waiting time after school.
So I think that begs the conversation then, and it could be related to what comes out of the policy subcommittee, but whether or not these need to be adjusted. I mean, there's a difference between having an aspiration and the reality of what you're actually able to deliver.
Well, I think we'd look at whether they're incorporated in policy or whether they remain in procedure. And I think a policy would help best set a procedure, because that's the reconciliation. Does the administration's procedure
Right.
allow us to execute a policy that the board has adopted? And I think that you know where we stand with regards to that.
My second question, if we were able to next year adjust the high school time to make it later, right? Because as far as I understand, where part of the conundrum we're in is because we weren't able to change the start time of the high school. How would that change the current configuration of the system that we have today, or that we intend to have by December?
Well, I think that as we look to get these drivers on board and expand to Essex Junction, I think we look to sort of hit a pause button until we can start this conversation with Bob Travers, with Rob Reardon, with the rest of the educational leadership team to look at it, because it's also the condensing of no longer having a 50-minute gap between grades 5 and grade 6. So there was that conundrum that also happened.
Oh, okay.
Transportation created that 50-minute gap so there could be a process there that helped on some of these procedural guidelines.
Yeah.
So I think what we want to do is expand to Essex Junction, look at start and stop times, being informed but not necessarily dictated by our transportation, and then take a look at where we are with the 25 drivers and what is the right amount going into budget deliberation, into our schedulings and so forth. We also there's a contractual issue that we didn't address last year with length of school day at the high school. And we know part of Beth's and I's research of talking to people in the public during that start and stop time is that people have a lot of feelings about how they want availability of their high school student to care for their younger students. So we are going to have to navigate that as a community and as a school district when we start to talk about start, duration, and end time for high school, and maybe not having it be in perfect synchronicity of the youngest grades. But that's some of our work to do as a group to kind of wrestle with that.
And one final question. So I know that you and Beth and Bob will start a conversation, but does the conversation also need to take place with the sending districts, and how does that work?
If I could, we have a RAB meeting
with the sending school administrators this Thursday, and I've asked Bob to put on the agenda a discussion about the start times moving next year for Essex, because I think that it's very advantageous for us to start engaging those folks earlier rather than later. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more, after that meeting about, but they're going to be involved, at least I know, starting this Thursday.
Al, and then Kim.
Quick question. Are there any plans to take a look at the age grouping by school to see if there's any advantage in transportation areas, if there were some changes made between schools?
I think that there's been a number of sort of thought exercises right now, knowing that transition from school to school is can have a pretty major impact on the learners, and that we've potentially additional transitions that we built into our system with a K2 and then a 3-5 and then a 6-8 and a 9-12, and in the junction very, very similar, slightly different configuration. But we're also working off of the promise of merger and understanding that there's a lot of things in our future as a school district, and that the idea of potentially consolidation or changing of grade groupings and even school assignments all have their own energy to them. And so I guess we're going a little bit slow in that process. But the research of transitions is leading us to question, is this the same, do we want the same configuration that we've had for 40 years going forward?
That is the question.
Yeah. Kim?
I think I have a different question, but a thought off of that is that also as the district works through unification and collaboration, you start to hear the notion that there would be more equity, and some of that resistance to change, like, if I were siloed in a particular K-8 in a neighborhood or otherwise, at K-5, if we were to break down some of the barriers and have more K-5 schools or whatever, the fewer transitions would be. I think as a community begins to see collaboration so that it feels as though the experience would be equally good and not the, oh, I don't want to go there. I imagine there's trust built. And that, I think, is a good reason to go slow in that category, probably. But the question I had, and I think I'm just looking at this chart, Andre, and I don't think that either Westford or Essex Town would have any students that live closer than 1.5 miles from the high school. So that's tough. It was the half a mile walk to the stops that I think I was understanding may not be passable in parts of Westford, and there are probably some places that may or may not be safe to do that, and dirt roads someplace in Essex either. So I just wanted to clarify that. But the question I had, which is something probably within our control, is the earliest AM arrivals. I just wanted to make sure, and I was trying to remember what we had for staffing coverage for early drop-offs and later pickups at all the buildings. I feel like I remember that to be an issue perhaps at ADL regarding timing. And so we're stating this as our aspiration, but I just wanted to make sure we've resolved issues around the pieces that we can control with respect to staffing. Okay. And then I don't know that this is a transportation question as much as what has been the impact on middle school activities at EMS from the result of the, either lack of second bus, or are they doing stuff before or after? I know that was a major issue, and I'm just wondering.
Some happening before, and they're figuring that out as they go. They're working on things like that. So there are some being offered before. There's a few being offered. It wasn't to the extent that it was before.
Is that something that we would be able to, at some point, get a fuller picture?
So yes, and
the
we'll have to
impact?
also look at, so how are those offered at ADL? How are they offered at you know, Westford, and Marcy has figured out electives this year, so how is she doing that? And that team is working on things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then whatever other, and again, totally not transportation, but just trying to understand as we approach budget, languages. I don't know that I fully appreciated that Westford didn't have Spanish, that there's different number of days
They have
being
French.
offered in other, yeah, so like, but I think ADL and Essex have, both.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things are more budget time things, talking about how we are progressing along that spectrum.
It's equity, yeah.
Do you have a sense of how many people, how busy the hotline was today for Jamie?
There was no calls today.
No calls today? Okay, thanks. And I just wanted, one other thing is I experienced another win that's not on your list in my community, which is that through Front Porch Forum and just through neighbors, people carpooling and stepping up to do some of this transportation as a community, stepping up to take on some of this. And as we talk about school and community relations and improving some of those things, to me, that's a win that the community has started to solve some of these problems for ourselves.
I guess another win that I realize now is you just said that with the idea of carpooling is that we found that there isn't a necessity for an extra parking lot, and that we have 30 to 40 spots that are available each day on property, and we will do some modest expansion of the C lot behind the bleachers in the football field, but that will be something that was not the issue that we ran into.
So does that mean the one behind the library will or will not?
We'll discontinue that use.
Great. Thanks for being
Going
clear.
into, I think, either coming out of either the October break or coming out of the Thanksgiving break, but that's a local administration decision on how they manage that. It's all faculty parking right now.
Okay, Kim? This might be a win, but I just also don't know. Are people still utilizing, I think it's 7 to 5 with library coverage here?
I don't know those numbers, I know.
But
I
is
tried
it-
to
it's
get to
still
the library
open
I
and
can't
available?
Because there's
Yeah.
students, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were,
So I
we
think-
were near that anyways. I think we were somewhere in the range of needing to add solid coverage, like 20 minutes worth of that, but the demand's been there. I mean, this is a really attractive facility.
Yeah.
Students use it, even if they're waiting for sporting events or other activities, so.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from board, comments from board members? Okay, I'll open it up to the audience. Jason?
You talk about combining Summit and Fleming as far as busing. Would that mean that you would look at changing the time that Fleming operates to match Summit and Hiawatha? So that if children are riding on the buses, they would all get off at the same time, need to get on at the same time, versus having a 15-minute delta today?
There is a 15-minute difference. The buses will arrive at Summit, and students will walk to Fleming from there. That might be a difference. It is definitely something we could look at. We haven't had that conversation with Dan Ryan about the change. I'm not sure that I would want to do that mid-year, although
It's more on the back end, otherwise Summit students are waiting 15 extra minutes for Fleming to get out and then walk to the bus. So the Summit students will be waiting for a lot longer at the end of their day.
Something to think about. Thanks, Jason. Todd?
Yeah, I was just curious for, in the town, are there any students who live within the, maximum walking path to school that aren't provided busing now? Or are they provided busing?
There's students on Foster Road that are middle school students that there's not a bus. There is a bus for Essex Elementary that goes down there, but, and then the connecting neighborhood to that at Tanglewood is actually outside the walking zone, but we have we have a really high occurrence of bike riders and walkers from that neighborhood, which will probably change in inclement weather. So there are a limited number. There's a walkout zone for Essex Elementary in the Meadows Edge neighborhood that's right across the street from it. But we also don't have a crossing guard that mans that crossing right now. So we could, as we add crossing guards, which I'm pleased to say we added 6 crossing guards and now have all our locations currently manned, minus sicknesses that occur without advance warning. So there are some walkout zones that, as we added crossing guards, we'd feel more comfortable in Essex Town. Founders Road right in there is a crossing that is, again, even though it's all school traffic, it's a pretty poorly traveled part of the road there, so.
Okay, in the back, Idaho, could you identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Sam Hooker from the Junction. Mr. Donahue touched on actually part of my question. Sounds like the bench for bus drivers is not very deep. What happens when a bus driver gets sick?
We depend upon our contractor, and they're able to pull, on a substitute basis, they're able to pull from their charter business to some degree. You know, they're managing not only school to and from, but they're also managing all our after-school sports and others. So they have some depth to be able to go to, but not on a permanent basis. They've also been able to pull 3 people out of retirement, which we've been able to use over the course of this, and that's why one of the next drivers is replacing a person that is on round 2 of retirement, or an interest to be on round 2 of retirement.
The manager of the bus garage often drives, so she knows all the roads.
Jason?
One of the other things I see on this chart is about earliest AM arrival, 30 minutes for K through 5, and then the other times. In the interest, even with the problems in Essex Junction with parents at dropping off the kids with the tight 15-minute windows that they have to live with this year versus previous years when they had 30 minutes, have we looked at maybe going back to that 30 minutes now, since it's going to have to be staffed anyway, to kind of help ease the congestion even of the drop-offs that are occurring? There's like a line at Hiawatha right for that 15 minutes, and ADL is a mess when it's trying to be drop-off and pick-up time because of that tight window.
So it certainly, yes. We know that in the town, because we're not even in with this, we're having some early drop-offs as early as 40 minutes before school starts. And so we know that there's some supervision and some requirements. We're asking parents that drive their kids to school not to use that as an opportunity for them to have drop-off as a convenience 40 minutes before school, which is some of the battle. And some of the battle is won by individuals talking with principals and explaining what circumstances are in their lives, and we've been accommodating those. With regards to the 15 minutes and the 30 minutes, that actually the longest standing practice in the Junction is 15 minutes before school starts. It was 2 years ago, it moved to 30 for the purposes of trying to get breakfast embedded into the school schedule.
I beg to differ. As long as my children have gone to Summit School, so my son's now in 6th grade, and the school started at 8 o'clock, they had somebody out there at 7:30.
I'm sorry, Jason, I have to differ. I couldn't work at ADL 3 or 4 years ago because I couldn't drop off before 7:45. So there were at least a few years there where it was 15, and then it was 30 for the last few. So it might have gone back and forth over the years.
I've gone back and forth, I've been doing 7:30.
Okay, we are way behind schedule. I think Brian has heard the issue and will take it into consideration. Okay? Yes.
Is Green Mountain Transit a
Could
permanent?
you identify
Yeah, my
yourself?
name is Mike Kupfer. I live in the town. Is Green Mountain Transit a permanent solution for the rest of the year?
Oh, for the rest of the year?
Green Mountain.
So public transit is, I think it's at this point in time, with our next priority being the Junction, it's absolutely the solution for this fiscal year.
So in prior meetings, we talked about lack of communication skills during this whole process. And here we are again. it seems to me the intention all along has been to keep this a permanent solution. It's just now we're getting to saying it's a permanent solution for this year. We need to put that out there to people that Green Mountain Transit is the permanent solution for Essex Town for students that live within a half mile of that walking radius. That's what that's what everything is pointing towards. We just need to say it and to communicate that to the public. Next thing, does Essex Westford School District pay Green Mountain Transit at all?
Yes.
So we use the words free, and it's, first of all, taxpayer subsidized, and now it's Essex Westford School District subsidized. Doesn't seem to be the appropriate use of that word in those two instances.
It's for the student, so
No, I understand.
what we
At
were
no
trying to.
additional- At no additional charge would be more.
Had no choice.
Exactly. Have we looked at the crossing lights on Route 15 as the state goes through this huge project to change all those lights? If you notice, there's walking signals that some are no right turns, all red lights, some are not. I know that's a state-run project, but I walk that area a lot, and I've had a lot of emails back and forth with the state on that. Please check that to make sure that all those Route 15 new crossing signals are no right turns, all red lights. It's very important, especially when snowbanks are coming, and to have kids walking out there. We have to make sure that those are working correctly.
Brian, do you understand what it means?
Yeah, and I can certainly, I think that we can be a common voice to both the state and the town. We can certainly advocate with a loud voice as a school district. I think your voice is also incredibly valuable in that.
I've already done that to the Route 15 old stage. That's now locked down as every red lights come on, no right turns, everybody stops. So, I can help with that, absolutely. If it is a permanent solution, can we think about adding some sort of structure to keep kids out of the snow and rain down in the corner here? We seem to have, a lot of students using the tree for shade on hot days and that kind of thing. But as we get into the colder, rainy, snowy months, to stick them down there for 40 minutes a day, it would be great if they had some shelter.
It's actually a great point on an action item. It's something we're working with Green Mountain Transit on right now in looking at what their systems are that they have already in stock and what we could do, and then working with the town and village to make sure that we would be able to get a fast track on getting something permitted.
Thank you. Last question, your goals here for June 19th, maximum wait time for Freedom Bus for the high school, 20 minutes at the end of the day. Right now you have a bunch of bus routes that are an hour wait, and they're labeled as A and B. Any thought of changing those A routes and B routes to match the A days and B days so that that student that's on that hour wait bus every day, they can just be on it every other day, and we can move those?
Those routes are geographically assigned more, and then the students, I guess I would need some help in understanding.
Sure, you have a 25A and a 25B. So
Yep.
25A goes out and comes back at 3:30, you pick up 25B. Why don't they do the 25B route on B days first and then do the A route second?
Something to think about.
Thank you.
Are they doing the exact same route, Brian?
Let him think about it.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I was like,
Would that be
I thought that I
feasible?
heard him say it wasn't the same route.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Diane?
I read the email from Ben Dickey that went out to parents. And I'm wondering if the gentleman in the audience got that as a parent, got that letter to talk about that the Green Mountain Transit was going to be a permanent solution. I believe that was supposed to have gone out.
Yes, it did go out.
Okay, so
Yeah. And it has been an email, so I was confused.
Yeah, I'm, you know, because I'm kind of going, I just read this.
I wrote it
and-
down to question that. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay. So I'd like to wrap this discussion up if we're ready. All set. Okay, thank you, everyone. All right, our next item is to talk about proxy voting for VSBIT, VHI, and VSBA. I guess first we should establish who is going to the VSBA annual meeting. Okay, great. Who would be willing to or interested in doing the early morning VSBIT and VHI meetings?
I'll do it again.
I'm okay with it. What time, 6?
No,
Yeah,
it's,
I don't know.
it's
We were both
8:15
there
or
last
something.
year too. So, right.
Okay.
I did it last year.
8:15.
You can have it this year.
8:15?
8:15.
No, yeah, 8:15.
8 o'clock is the
Friday morning.
Friday morning.
Friday morning. Yeah, that'll work fine.
Okay, so I think we need to vote on this. So I would, well, let's do these two first. I would entertain a motion to submit, that we submit Andre Roy's name as the person authorized to vote for EWSD in the VHI and VSBIT meetings. Thanks, Brenda. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Now,
Sandra.
Yeah.
we
Thank
have
you.
to send his name in for that. For the VSBA meeting, we can have only one person who takes the ribbon or whatever it is that we vote with. This is for the business meeting. We can sit together and, you know, talk as things come up. But only one person can get that ribbon. So who might be interested in doing that?
I'll do it. No one else.
Okay, that's fine. All right, Kim will be down front somewhere, so she can't do it. So, I'll entertain a motion that we authorize Patrick to vote for EWSD at the VSBA business meeting.
Motion made.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Okay. I think it is helpful if we try to sit together if we go to that meeting, because things will undoubtedly come up that we don't anticipate. All right, next we're going to try to go through these resolutions so that Patrick has some sense of the board. What I'm going to do is to try to quickly say what the resolution is about, what the VSBA board's position is on the resolution, and maybe a half sentence about why. And what I'd like us to do in order to be as efficient as possible is say if you do not agree with the board, VSBA board's position. If we all agree with it, let's just move on to the next one. I don't see any point in spending a lot of time discussing each one if it's not necessary.
And just
Keely.
as a very quick understanding how it gets used by Nicole in the legislature is really sort of the platform that she works from when looking to have a better sense of the sentiment of the full membership on positions that she may take on legislation that comes up in the State House, or other times she's asked for her opinion, or the VSBA board is at that level. So it's not, the wordsmithing, though we try and not have that happen at the annual meeting, is not really the intent, but rather to figure out positions and give her guidance on how to do her work on behalf of all boards.
She sits in the legislature and represents school boards. Kim was at the meeting, so I think Kim can help us if we're having trouble understanding the position.
My question was basically about wordsmithing. A couple of these have grammatical errors.
Yeah.
We don't need to give any input on
No.
inaccuracies.
I mean,
No.
it's not for the purposes of the conversation. If you want to send something to me, I'm happy to pass it along, and that might be able to be done ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so the first one is a resolution there are lots from the Burlington School Board. This basically says we would not like to have the General Assembly vote for cost containment legislation and legislation that affects budgets after school boards have already adopted their budgets or voters have approved them. The position of the VSBA board is to pass this resolution. Does anyone have a difference of opinion? Okay, let's move on to resolution 2. This is a fairly long resolution. It's talking about funding at the federal level. The board's recommendation was not to pass it. The reason for that is that voice at the federal level should come from the National School Boards Association, not an individual state. Does anyone disagree with that?
I just don't see a problem with the Vermont School Board Association advocating for things which may or may not be a priority of all school boards. But if everyone else thinks that their reasoning is sound, then
I think the capacity to be able to affect that within the scope of the VSBA would be very limited. And we are members of the National School Boards Association, and at those resolution-setting occasions, there's responsiveness around a lot of matters. Something as prescribed as this would not be something we could really affect in this coming year, likely, and so that it wasn't among the priorities, and didn't seem as though it was going to have the time or energy of Nicole's efforts with respect to all the other bodies of work.
The third resolution is also from Burlington, and it asks the VSBA to do specific bargaining training for board members around a specific method of bargaining for collaborative negotiations. The point that was made in the discussion is that this kind of negotiation really takes training of both the board and the association, and there are mediation services that will do that training, which really needs to be done by both sides at the same time. So they didn't feel this should pass because it shouldn't be just the SBA doing it. And it's available. Anybody object to that position? Okay, let's move to resolution 4. This is a resolution that asks the SBA to give awards to school boards that settle contracts amicably. and in ways that don't divide communities. The point in the conversation was that, school boards can work to do that, but there are two sides in the process, and you can't always control what's happening on the other side. And also that VSBA already has an awards process for boards, so the recommendation was not to pass. I think we all know from last year that working collaboratively works really well. So I don't think we're saying that we disagree with a collaborative process. I think it makes a lot of sense. But the training, there is already a way to get that training done. No, I'm sorry.
That was the one before, but I think it's a similar theme.
But it's a similar theme. That's a two. Anybody object to the do not pass recommendation? Okay, resolution 5, also from Burlington. This is saying that in the cost containment conversation, there should be consideration given to the amount of social services that are being delivered by school districts. The recommendation is to pass this resolution. Anybody object to that? Okay. Resolution 6. This is sort of interesting, since I certainly never connected our discussions about innovation zones with the organization ALEC. I think the whole discussion in Vermont around innovation zones was around something that would give districts a way to try to do things differently and to be relieved of regulations that might stand in the way. We've done this in Vermont in the past, years and years ago. Westford applied for a waiver on this in the same spirit as this. So the proposal is to do not pass. Does anybody object? Kim?
I was suspicious of this discussion about innovation zones last year because of the clear national association with charter schools, which have their strengths and weaknesses, but so I don't have a problem with this resolution, especially if it's factually accurate that the resolution had an origin in a particular politically based think tank.
It definitely did not. As a matter of fact, that connection
Which is
was
typoed in the resolution.
Kim was involved in the conversation that developed this resolution.
And I'm trying to recall, it was last year or the year before, I'm trying to recall.
The work that led to the
it.
actual resolution went on.
It was back
winter
with
before last.
And it was really to provide, as Martha said, the opportunity for some space to allow schools and districts, especially as they're coming together, to consider how they could do things differently to improve opportunities for students. And so that connection, I think, was definitely not ever intended, nor any source of that body of work to be circumventing charter schools in Vermont or anything. It wasn't at all the case. So that was a surprising resolution to come forward this year, as a matter of fact. But.
Pat?
I think that the conversation that we did have last year during the voting was there was never any intention that it was going to be paving the way for charter schools. And I think that we as a board have actually come across and agreed with several instances where maybe we could apply that, like the Forest School, for example, where there are, non-traditional instances of learning. So even though, I'm certainly no fan of the Koch brothers, the idea itself is one that I think could be applied in a really kind of holistic way that, is something that we as a board were interested in looking at, or at least, approving of.
Other comments? Okay, seeing none, I think we will agree with do not pass. I think if there is a discussion about whether this actually supports charter schools, I would hear, is it the sense of the board that charter school legislation is not something that we would support for Vermont? Yeah. Okay.
Vermont.
I mean, why would we vote against innovation? By having us all merge at various stages throughout the state, we are trying to be innovative, to be more creative, to be more productive, to provide services to students.
To be more efficient.
To be more efficient. So to me, it's kind of, seems like an oxymoron to be voting against innovation, okay? I think I need clarification on this, what do they really want to have happen? Because this resolution doesn't really
So I think
describe it.
From my perspective, it's purely political, and somebody found the word innovation zone in something that Alec proposed. And they made a connection that I don't think was ever made when this was proposed.
Okay.
All right, Resolution 7 was withdrawn. It's exactly the same as Resolution 8. Resolution 8 asks that the SBA promote teachers to be on local school boards. There's more to it. The recommendation was not to pass. The committee and the board felt that it would be inappropriate to push one constituency of groups who might be interested in running for the school board over another. Does anyone object? Keely?
I understood this to make local teachers permitted to serve on local boards, but just have to be recused from matters involving teacher compensation. Am I misunderstanding it?
They are not explicit about whether it would be a local teacher sitting on their own local board, but we cannot both sit on this board and be employed by this district.
Right.
So that is not allowed. And if they were otherwise meaning that the VSBA would be promoting that teachers in general should be sitting on boards in their own communities, that's the argument against picking a particular constituency to solicit or promote their sitting on boards, because they wouldn't be allowed to sit on this board.
I understood this in the whereas section to be talking about having teachers join this board in the same way that Laura is on this board.
I don't think they were explicit to suggest that
should be included on local school boards just as students are, as consultants on all public issues outside of executive session. Which I think is an entirely reasonable thing, and I've said that before, and I know most of you disagree with me, but I think the more teachers that are involved in discussing education, the better, because education is about learning, so.
And I think in thinking about it in the VSBA roles and responsibilities of a board operating at a policy level, it would be important to know that there's been thoughts around the policy we set and its impact on the entire district. And so I think there's certainly a risk that, and I'm going to say that we aren't even getting our student voices in, especially in this meeting, as much as we should, but that presentations that can include teachers to bring the board to a better understanding are really important. But technically, the only employee of the school board is the superintendent. So distinguishing roles and responsibilities and board operation at a policy level may or may not necessarily benefit from a particular constituency sitting at the table.
Right.
So this, I mean, the way I read it, this resolution isn't promoting one constituency to run for the school board. It's actually just saying that the VSBA will encourage members to include teachers as active participants in meetings and in discussions, not actually running for the school board.
And favors the participation of teachers as board members.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, right.
It's late.
Diane?
When I was on the U46 board, for the first couple years, there was actually a local resident who was a profession was teacher, but was employed by another district. She did add something, because it was her profession, because she had, different point of view than somebody off the street. But, I think we have invited the professionals to come and tell us about how life is. And I don't think we've stopped anybody from coming to chat with us, no matter who they are. So if the resolution was to encourage more individuals at any level, especially teachers maybe, the wording to me is very specific to say teachers get on the board. Well, they can run. I don't think it dissuades anybody, but I think it needs some rework to come back to get approval.
Okay, so I've heard one objection. Are there any others? Oh, then I think in the interest of time, we'll move on. Resolution 9 comes from Kingdom East and asks that the SBA look at the new boundaries of SUs and SDs, because things have changed a lot when creating their regions. And the recommendation is to pass. Is there any objection? Okay. That would make sense.
Yes.
Resolution 10. This talks about basically the education and training of board members, and the conversation was that it's what is already happening, so there's no reason not to pass it. So the recommendation is to pass. Any objection? Okay, 11. So this is about school safety and security and an individual district not wanting to follow state protocols. The conversation seemed to be about this district. This school board had talked about wanting to be able to arm their teachers. So the recommendation is to do not pass. Is there any objection?
No.
Okay.
They can ask for a school innovation zone.
That's right. Good one, Hugh.
Yes.
Resolution 12 basically says there can't be new legislation or new mandates that will cause any new costs. I think the recommendation is to do not pass. I think people agree to some degree with the sentiment, but you can't restrict yourself to not being able to address new situations or things that might happen that you can't anticipate. Any objection to the do not pass recommendation? Okay, resolution 13 was withdrawn. Resolution 14, they ended up taking no position on this. They had, the resolution was resubmitted, but as I recall, they still didn't feel like it was specific enough about what the resolution is looking for. Is that fair, Kim? Or
That's what I recall as well, and it is unclear exactly what is the position that we want to be taken in particular items that would satisfy what they're looking to be resolved, and it's also asking that we take a position with the U.S. Congress. So I think that local communities have taken positions that are the right fit for their local communities, and to the extent possible, the VSBA helps the legislature find avenues for that voice, which happened last year with students testifying. So I think.
And we did our own resolution last year.
Can you scroll back up?
And many school
page
districts
9,
did,
please?
as a matter of fact.
Some of that's already been passed.
Right, it has.
So I'm a little confused on why they're advocating no action. I myself have no problem saying not to pass and take that position, because I think it's some of these issues have already come to be law, like the bump stocks are outlawed 3 days now, 2 days. The handful of ammunition, well, somebody's hand is bigger than mine, so it's got more capacity. It's not, doesn't have enough specifics to bring it for a discussion.
So I wonder if we want to actually get a sense, because the VSBA board not taking a position means that we can take a position as a board, because when it goes before the full membership, there will likely be a position taken up or down on this on the floor. So giving Pat.
But again, this is asking not Vermont, well, it's asking the U.S. Congress and Vermont.
Right, I think what Andre, am I hearing you say that you would advocate for a position of this board that says do not pass because of the way that is presented?
Rather than say no action.
Yeah.
Because I think your point is valid, that if this will be presented, and there could be a position.
There will likely be a position out of it, up or down.
A stronger position. Keely?
I think insofar as it is talking about stuff on the federal level, it only makes sense for us to take the same position as on that earlier one about education funding, which would be do not pass.
Right.
But if they were to edit it to be specifically about recommendations to the Vermont legislature, then that isn't as clear of a.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that can happen in the process is this board might submit it next year in a format that reflects the implementation of some of these other things, the federal and state laws. So they may come back, or a different board may come back with a similar sentiment. They could potentially edit it from the floor, and but this is a pretty extensive resolution in terms of its wording. And I'm not, I know that the committee offered them some suggestions, I think, and, you know, that this is still what was there. So I think I think knowing what our board would like as, if it stays in this language, or providing some strong guidance to Patrick if it were to change in these ways, how we would feel would be really helpful for Patrick.
Right. So I think, could we all agree that because of what we said before, advocating at the level of Congress is a no, right? Because that's what we agreed before. It does talk about feeling that arming teachers makes no sense. If it were just about arming teachers, and arming teachers making no sense, would we want to vote yes? Yeah. Yeah. If it came to a conversation about assault weapons, I don't know that that's a conversation we have time for tonight. Would you agree?
I mean, I kind of foresee this being a 45 or 50-minute long resolution during the meeting, like as people go back and forth, wordsmithing it, as it were. I mean, I'm content with us taking a position of do not pass unless we see some editing, and then at that time, since we usually sit together anyway, we can just chat and go from there.
Is the board comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Pat. All right, 15. This is Westminster. Basically, it asks that all mergers, and it asks a few things, but it asks that all merger savings be used to reduce taxes. The recommendation is not to pass. I think that's something we want to do, but again, I don't think we want it to be a hard and fast rule that takes away all our flexibility. Anybody object? Okay, let's move on to 17.
16.
Whoops, 16. This is asking to relook at membership of SU boards. Doesn't really apply to us, but the committee's recommendation is to pass because things are changing so dramatically because of Act 46. So, Keely.
Could I just add that I would support anything that suggests examining the laws governing supervisory unions, period, because we had that problem with voting for our board, so this seems like an area they need to
Right, but that's not
address.
supervisory unions, that's unified unions. They're two different structures. So we used to have the supervisory union when it was Westford, the high school in Essex Junction. But now we're a unified union school district, so this doesn't apply to us at all. But, yeah.
Anything
we
about
should have thought
structures and governance.
We should
Pass
have,
it.
we should have thought about a resolution asking that they be sure to revise the unified union laws.
Sunset on that.
Yeah.
I think.
Too bad we didn't.
Last year, we had the opportunity, and I think helped tweak some of the language that was around having to consult with the select board versus, I don't know. We've had our hand on a bunch of that. We just have to make sure that that stays when they either make their revisions. I think Dylan's on it.
Or the sunset gets lifted if they don't get their act together.
Right.
Okay. Any objection to the position pass? All right. let's move on to Resolution 17. This is a very specific resolution around a town that is being asked to consolidate under the state plan that doesn't like having to take on the debt of another district. The Resolutions Committee talked about the fact that there are assets that come with that debt that, you know, it isn't really talking about the whole picture, and they recommend do not pass. But this really is very specific to districts that haven't merged, so. Any objection?
No.
Resolution 18 is one that came from the VSBA Resolutions Committee that talks about teaching conflict resolution and consensus building and engaging in civil discourse as a way to set example for our students. And the recommendation is to pass. You okay with that?
Yep.
We're gonna pass that one up to the national level.
Resolution 19 is quite complex. It sets out a process for how any healthcare change that is negotiated at the state level will be ratified. Kim, do you want to take this one? You've probably thought about it more than I have.
We've had some conversations around it, so a lot of it is coming out of the law, but much of the law was not as specific as to how appointment on that committee would happen. And so we tried to craft some guidelines that were VSBA sort of acting as the agent on behalf of all school boards to come up with a collection of people who will sit and negotiate on behalf of all school boards with the matter of healthcare. It indicates, you know, that folks should have an understanding of healthcare. Like, you can read what the process is. This resolution is to say, this is what the VSBA will do to try and seat people in those positions. We've learned that we can't appoint like an administrator where we would normally in negotiations have an administrator with us at a table. It can be a resource, but that's not one of the appointed members because they will be receiving healthcare benefits under the plan. Just as we've got Chris Leopold that negotiates with us, the VSBA is going to be seeking legal counsel to represent all school boards to act as a resource. So it's trying to set out those guidelines so people will know how the selection process happens.
Then it talks about ratification.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the part that's much more complicated.
Yeah. So when we ratify a contract, I had to sort of put it in context of what I understood about how we do ours. So we may get to a complete TA on the entire contract in our negotiation process. And then we ratify as a board and they ratify as their full membership. And that's what happens when we all sit right here. And when it's done on a statewide level, how does this come to be? And so the process will involve a video conference, I think, an info webinar, and then there'll be electronic balloting, and it's just, we're getting into this electronic balloting that we can do for districts that want to participate in the annual meeting as well, and there are similar guidelines around that. So if we didn't have a representative at the annual meeting, we would have a 10 requirement to provide the name of the person, and they'd be given access to be the voting delegate for that purpose. So it's somewhat similar. And the expectation is that you would also be informed of what the agreement was at that point.
Right, that's what the webinar is for.
The webinar is for.
My questions are around, it talks about one delegate from each district.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what size the district is. So who, Burlington gets one vote and, Peachum gets a vote?
I think so.
Or Stowe, who,
Yeah.
have been
Yeah.
given permission not to merge.
Huh. Yes, I can't think of any other way, because that's the way the voting happens even at the annual meeting. Each school district is
Right.
afforded a vote. So I don't
But
I don't think we
doesn't
could
invite, that doesn't involve matters of money.
Absolutely, no, well, no, but there have been times when we were doing a change in the bylaws around dues. So that, but I think there was just no other way that we can envision that going. Would the alternative be that it be related to the size of the budget or the number of students, and we've just not had that weighting?
The amount of dues you pay.
The dues you pay, which is a balance of both a flat fee and a
That's right.
FTE.
Direct
So it is
fee
now,
anyway.
that is related
That's
to
even
both. That's ridiculously complicated. So if we were to have a different suggestion, I know from Nicole's standpoint, I don't think that we could think of another one that either one made sense, or I'm not even positive if there's legality. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, there'd be question about this being legal too.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't.
So who?
There's very little guidance provided in the
In
legislation.
the legislation.
Almost none.
So Pat, Brendan, Keely.
Yeah, I mean, for some of the reasons Martha just discussed, I would feel uncomfortable voting to pass without some really sort of more explicit information that is contained just in these paragraphs. I did have a question, Kim. Do you know, would this just be for the voting process, is it a majority rules, or like when we're passing resolutions, we're like 66% for this, or would this be, if it was 51%, it's a pass, or?
I do not know, and these are great questions, and I would love to gather them and send them back, because I'm going to say that some version of this has to pass, because we don't have a way to seat people in the negotiations committee on behalf of all school boards in a process that needs to begin like yesterday.
So I think it would be great if you do send these thoughts
I
back,
absolutely
because
will.
It's better if Nicole
And I
others
apologize if there's
have-
something I'm not remembering too, but I don't
think so.
I don't think so either, and we talked about this.
So I think, if Nicole and others have a chance to give it more thought, that will be helpful. Brendan?
So I'm confused, and I apologize for not knowing, does the legislation assign the VSBA the responsibility for designing the process?
Yeah, the legislation left it silent, and so the VSBA will sort of act as the agent, and they've, had some conversations. Nicole has to just try and figure it out. Also, with VSBID and resources for the legal support to do the work.
Right.
And a neutral, we have the benefit of Deb Anderson and immediate response to what's the cost of a proposal. And that trust of our teachers and we, as we sit at the table, is invaluable to the process. So we've tried to advocate for a common financial analyst on this, and I think that has not been as smooth or simple a request as Nicole and as we thought that just makes sense. We should have a common set of facts we're dealing with to cost this stuff out. And that was not necessarily the immediate assumption that the NEA thought made sense. So I'm not even quite sure where that stands, but so much of this was left silent. And what resulted is that the VSBA is trying to set up a process that will be transparent so people know how people ended up sitting on that committee.
And I guess my question, Kim,
And
is that.
it's a 6-year term.
Is this essentially like a straw proposal, a straw man proposal that the VSBA would put forward? Because or are they just sort of assuming that they have the authority to decide this?
Well, it has to be
Has to be
decided.
ratified by
So
school districts, right?
by the school districts, and as the
Doesn't
every
the
school
NEA
district
have
in
an
the
opinion on
state-
this?
What?
Doesn't the NEA have an opinion on
Oh,
what
they
the
have their
structure would be?
own. They will have their own process of how they appoint their representatives.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Oh,
They-
yes.
Okay.
Would that it were that we were appointing all of them, but no, the
Okay, so
NEA has.
this is just to seat the negotiating parties.
This is to seat the, absolutely, I'm sorry, yes.
And how-
Okay, I'm sorry for being confused.
No,
So
not at all.
that's an
We,
interesting-
we have to appoint 5 representatives,
Right.
and they will be appointing 5 representatives. And there was not a lot of detail on how that happens in the legislation.
So I think that's far less concerning. I trust Nicole and others to pick good people. It's this ratification part. Maybe it's worth having Nicole ask from NEA how they envision ratification happening.
And I don't want to say that that hasn't already happened. So what I'd love to do is send her the questions, and it may be that nothing even needs to change in the language except to explain why this was the most common sense process and what the NEA intends to do around theirs. Because, you know, I mean, we have the good fortune of just being 10 of us, and we sit at this table and did our ratification. The teachers had to convene their folks, and you know, at a time somewhat convenient for them, and there's far more of them, to get their vote ratified. And the reality is that we go into these ratification votes with some sense of comfort in that the process has been vetted with the advocates sitting at the table for the positions, and feeling as though there was the authority to get to a final TA. So if I think about paralleling it with our process, I would like to think that that will be the case as well then. And we did talk about, we go into executive session as a local board to have conversations about status updates. And that's not in the resolution, but it has been considered, like, to what extent is that at all part of the process? Because of the confidentiality of the matter, it would be very, very difficult. And we did talk about not represented in this, but can we think of ways that that might even be possible? And so I can't speak to what our answer is on that, but we have anticipated, you know, that is it's a problem. It's different, and it's impactful cost-wise in a dramatic way in all of our districts.
Right, and if when in doubt, people vote no. So if school boards aren't informed about what's happening all along the way, and then you suddenly have this vote, I think that's going to be hard.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't understand how this ratification process is possibly going to result in it actually being ratified. It doesn't make sense to me to diffuse the vote that much. Like, I don't know if the Vermont NEA is going to go to one representative from each association or to the full membership of each association, but if they go to their full membership of each association, then the vote on the NEA side will be representative of, like, districts that have more teachers will get more of a say into what ends up happening. And if we're doing this one supervisory union or district, one vote thing, then there's gonna be a lot of districts that represent like really small numbers of people that could decide that they don't feel represented and scuttle the entire process. I don't understand why they would move, we're deciding the health plan to the state level and not just say, we're deciding the health plan.
Right.
Like,
Right.
And taking it outside of
This is
the
completely
local
confusing.
contract
to
at
have
all,
to-
which
right, to have to
it'll
still
only
go
be
back and-
referenced
right.
within
On
the
both
local contract.
sides.
I know that that would be so much more so the easier route, and I have to believe there must be some reason why it's not possible. But I will ask that question because, point well taken, and again, we're 10 of us here voting, and there's how many teachers in our unions and support staff ratifying their contracts? So that's disproportionate. We would not be assured by number of board members if each of us had a vote in that versus one per our school district at the statewide level. Like
No, I'm not
Burlington might
proposing-
have more people, there might be
Not
small
proposing
boards that
all
have more
school
people.
board members should, because that's
Yeah,
no more likely
it
to be
does.
representative
Exactly.
than each
Yeah.
district.
Right.
But weighting it
Yeah.
or something. like,
Yeah,
Just,
Either local districts are involved or they're not, right? I mean,
Right.
isn't the whole purpose that this is gonna be a consolidated process that happens at the
Mm-hmm.
statewide level?
Yeah.
Why would it go back to the districts for approval?
I just don't understand what they see the path to success of this health plan being.
right. And what is the I mean, ultimately, again, it would have been great had the legislation been that clear, but it wasn't. And so,
So what-
it's also not like, I mean, this was somewhat part of a compromise because, I think, I mean, it began with getting rid of VHI altogether. I mean, there are a lot of things that it began with, and I think having, gone through several evolutions before it got to the final thing in the waning days of the session. I'm sure if the governor had his way, he would have liked to have just said what it's going to be as opposed to, and I think he might have liked to have had the opportunity to make all the appointments on the side of the school districts. So obviously, I don't think the NEA just wanted it to be the state says so either. He had set the stage for what was going to be didn't sound like much of a negotiation. We didn't feel like the state was giving us much negotiation room, even as we sat at the table independently, each of the districts the last time around. So, but I will absolutely pass back to Nicole, provide rationalization as we go into this vote, as we sit there. This is one that has to pass because we have to get people seated, and getting these answers make sense. Ratification would have to happen in the spring, because we need to have plans in place, and
I hope it's before the spring.
I would hope so too.
How are people going to do budgets? So I would suggest that we not take a position on this, that those of us who are there talk as the conversation happens and try to figure out what we want to do.
Can I just make sure that I have the questions for Nicole? Why couldn't it just be ratified and approved at the state? After people have been appointed to do this work, why can't it just be ratified by that committee or something?
That's
Or
one.
maybe even,
So
I'm not sure that regional representatives on the VSBA board would even want to do it, but maybe at least that's a more finite group. I don't really know, because whatever. Okay, why can't it be approved at the state is the ideal?
So the second is, what isn't the size of a district taken into consideration? The third is the vote going to be by a simple majority? I think those are the three issues we've raised.
And I also have, how will the NEA be ratifying?
Right, yes. Yeah.
And is there consideration for how districts will be kept informed throughout the process?
Exactly. Yep. Okay, yeah.
My question is just, could we offer support for the selection criteria section without
Yeah.
Yes.
taking a position on the ratification section?
People feel comfortable with that. That's a
Yeah,
good
that would be
idea.
great. Are we good with that part of it?
Yes,
Okay.
I think we feel comfortable with that. Okay,
Okay.
let's move on. Patrick, you've got all this.
Yep.
Good. We'll be there to support you.
Cheering.
All right, let's see.
Gonna go rogue, you know,
Can-
everything.
Can I just offer one more thing, that if we get answers on this and Nicole sends out an updated set of explanation around this, it's actually senior night for Abby on the 16th, so I may or may not be here for a good portion of the agenda on the 16th. But if it's on the agenda and we have that information, would you guys be comfortable
Talking
discussing
about it
it so that we could get to, we are going to have an answer. I don't think there's another forum that would allow for approving a resolution by the full VSBA membership between now and when this would need to be ratified. So I know they're going to have to come out of that with something.
Okay, that's a
Thank
good
you.
idea, Kim. All right, I'd like to move through the rest of this agenda as quickly as we can. It's very late. Task team updates, communications.
So we're having a meeting on Thursday of our team, and we're going to be focusing on the monthly update that we talked about adding to our responsibility. So we'll be doing that. Update from Voices for Education. There's a meeting tomorrow to finalize the plan. The date has been set for December 1st, and the details are still being worked out by a very committed group of people who are moving that along for a half-day summit on December 4th, a first 4-hour summit, and we're working on the details of that. I wanted to share that Jamal Hankey, who's the president of the student body, student government, he and I went down to Castleton yesterday for the Making It Happen local leadership conference that the Vermont Council on Rural Development put on. There were 500 people from around the state that were there talking about leadership. Jamal and I were asked to facilitate a session on youth driving change. Jamal did an awesome job. We're so lucky to have him involved in this work. And then we sat on a panel for a session on engaging the public in K through 12 education and gave a presentation that way. It was a great day. I have information, participants, and the program, and the summary of the whole day is going to be sent to me in a link, and I'll be happy to share it with you when I get that. So I just wanted to let you know that, and also to those of you who are going to be at VSBA to look for Beth and others, Kim and a community member, and Tess and Jamal are all going to be present on a panel during the VSBA talking about the Voices for Education work too, so look out for them there.
That's exciting. Thanks, Liz. Questions, comments? Okay, transportation policy review.
Right, so we've already talked a lot about transportation tonight, so I'll give you the short version. The subcommittee kicked off its first meeting on Friday night, because we know how to party. And for some reason, Brian couldn't make it. I don't know why. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, this Thursday at 6:30 in the conference room. The minutes from our first meeting will be posted soon. A lot of what we talked about in our first meeting was actually addressed through tonight's update. So thank you very much to Beth and Brian and team for putting together this information and answered a lot of our sort of anxiety and questions. We spent a good portion of our first meeting reviewing transportation policies from other districts and starting to talk about how those could help inform or not the creation of a draft policy that we would ultimately bring to the full board. We also had some general conversation about what some of the monitoring would look like for the new policy. And we also talked generally about one of the other deliverables would be that if the policy that we end up recommending is dramatic in any way, based on the feedback that we heard from the administration at our last full meeting, we would try to bring some recommendations about implementation forward to try to guide those decisions, but not necessarily dictate those decisions. That's really the broad overview, unless members of the committee want to add something else.
That's perfect.
Great. All right, so I think people have been signing up for the annual conference that can, right? Looks like we're going to have good representation. Anything specific for the board agenda for October 16th that is beyond what is in our work plan, and/or things that we know are continuing areas of discussion?
I just had a request from a community member, which was sort of addressed tonight because we moved the transportation up as early in the school board business as possible. Is it possible to put things like that, or last spring when we had the Black Lives Matter discussions, anything that is extremely likely to attract community involvement at the head of the agenda right after the consent agenda? Or because it's school board business, does it have to be after the presentations? Oh.
So I suppose it doesn't have to be, and I'll listen to the will of the board, but my feeling is that those presentations are so critical to what we're doing and really should be the first focus. I don't mind doing what we did tonight and moving things on school board business that we think community is going to be interested in. I don't mind moving those things up. We didn't move it above the financial piece because we didn't want to keep Kathy out late. She lives in Johnson. So we'll think about all those things. And I apologize that we didn't think more about it this time. Yeah. I think we were just trying to get everything on.
Right, I knew it was going to be.
Full
Right.
agenda for sure.
Anything else about the 16th? Okay, and board message to the community. I think something about the principal's presentation, certainly. I think the transportation update, and maybe some highlights of the year-end financial report. I think talking about the fact that we didn't spend the transportation money, it doesn't hurt to keep saying that. Talking about how much our fund balance has increased. Yeah.
If this is going to be made publicly available, I think the information that the first big ouch number on a couple of the pages is related to the clawback of health stuff from the state would be really essential to attach to any posting of this.
That would be in the past, something like that would be more referenced in minutes and wouldn't be something that we would post.
Okay.
We could talk about how we want to post things in the future, but certainly, posting our external audit, but we haven't been too much, at least haven't had a history yet.
Okay.
I wonder, Brian, and it's just something to think about in that vein, would be if we want to do a notes page to financials, if we're doing them quarterly? Just
Oh, sure, yeah, we'll continue to evolve and get it so that it's a little bit more standalone and.
Yeah.
Okay. That's plenty, right? I don't think it's so interesting to the community now we talk about all this resolutions. All right, is there any other business?
Is there a reading assignment on this?
Oh,
Good question.
What's the homework?
So, homework. If you would like to begin the next meeting on the 16th, you could do a 30-page read. It would get you through the first chapter, the introduction and the first chapter. If you would like to hold off until November, you could just do a longer read. That was a really good question. I meant to do that, but I'm a little tired and not quite thinking. It's an easy read, so 30 pages really isn't that bad over 2 weeks.
Yeah, I like the
Really.
idea of kind of,
Chunking.
biting off chunks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll figure that out.
30 pages.
So,
16.
30 pages, I think,
I've already read it.
I think it's 30.
through chapter 2.
Yes, up to chapter 2. So the introduction is important too, to get an although you've probably heard me talk enough about it that you have the introduction already.
Right, it's through chapter 2, right?
Yes.
No,
Yes, chapter 2 starts on page 31, so.
so it's through chapter 1. I'm tired too. Pardon?
That one's for Marla.
I have one from Marlo
Is this for Grace?
Did you get one?
Grace. Oh,
I
no,
didn't get
Grace,
one.
Laura gets one for Grace.
Laura got one,
Laura got
but Kim doesn't have one.
I didn't get one. But,
Oh.
There's one extra.
but that's
over
probably
But
for
there's,
Grace.
No, I have Grace.
Oh, you have Grace's. Oh,
Laura
perfect.
has one for Grace.
Okay, thank you.
I have Marla's right here, which I will try to get to her. Kim has one coming to her.
All right, we are adjourned.